You want me to just leave him there bleeding on the floor?
Here you go.
Is that what we're doing
We came
tonight?
together to give you something
The clerk
special.
stared at her. The biker stared at her. Jasmine Carter stared at the $8.63 in her palm and hated every single one of them, including herself. She hadn't planned this. She hadn't planned anything about this night except getting home without collapsing. And now here she was, standing under fluorescent lights at 2:14 in the morning, about to do the single dumbest thing she'd done all year. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this one. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The city didn't have a name worth remembering anymore. That was how Jasmine Carter thought about it on the bad nights, and most nights were bad nights. It was one of those American cities that used to mean something. Used to have factories, used to have parades, used to have fathers who came home from work with dirt on their hands and money in their pockets. Now it had boarded windows and dollar stores and a gas station on every corner selling lottery tickets to people who knew they weren't going to win, but bought them anyway because hope had to live somewhere. Jasmine had lived here her whole life, 26 years, and she had the kind of tiredness that doesn't come from one bad night. It comes from 1,000 of them stacked on top of each other until your spine starts to curve under the weight. She worked at the Harmon distribution warehouse on the east side of town. Third shift, 10 at night until 6 in the morning. She moved boxes. She scanned barcodes. She stood for 8 hours on a concrete floor that did not care about her knees, her back, or her plans. The pay was $14.20 an hour, which sounds like something until you do the math. Until you subtract rent and the electric bill and the water bill and the gas to get to work and the groceries that never quite covered the whole week. Until you realize that $14.20 an hour means you are always exactly one emergency away from not making it. Tonight had been one of those emergencies. Her car had died 3 weeks ago. She'd been taking the bus to work since then when the bus ran, which it did not always do. Tonight it had not run. The 11:15 route just never showed up. Jasmine had stood at the stop for 40 minutes in a February wind that came off the river like it had a personal grudge, and then she'd walked 3.5 miles in work boots that were good for the warehouse floor but not for February pavement. By the time she finished her shift and started home, it was past 2 in the morning and her feet felt like they belonged to someone else. She stopped at Quick Mart because she always stopped at Quick Mart on the way home from the overnight shift. Not because she loved it, not because anyone loved it, but because it was open and it was warm, and sometimes just standing in a warm lit place for 5 minutes felt like survival. She planned to get a bottle of water and maybe a package of crackers. Something small. Something to get her through until morning. She had $8.63 in her checking account. Not $8.63 after expenses. $8.63 total. Her next paycheck wasn't until Friday. It was Tuesday. She pushed open the door and the little bell above it rang and the warm air hit her face, and for about 4 seconds, things were fine. Then she saw the biker. He was impossible to miss. The man was enormous, not just tall but wide, the kind of wide that comes from years of physical work and not from a gym. He had gray hair pulled back tight, a gray beard trimmed close, and both arms covered in tattoos that disappeared under a black leather vest. The vest had a patch on the back, white background, red letters, Hell's Angels. Below that, a bottom rocker that said the city's name, the city nobody remembered, which meant he was local, which meant he belonged to the chapter here. He was standing at the counter and he was bleeding. Not dramatically, not like a movie, just a steady seep from a gash on his forearm that had soaked through a makeshift wrap of paper towels he'd pressed against it, and his face had the tight, gray look of someone who had been hurting for a while and was managing it through will alone. He was leaning slightly on the counter, not collapsing, but leaning, and his other hand was flat on the surface, like he was making sure it was still there. The clerk was a young man named Derek. Jasmine had seen him here before. He was maybe 22, always wore the same blue vest, always had his phone out when he thought nobody was watching. Tonight, Derek was not on his phone. Tonight, Derek looked like he wanted to be anywhere on earth except behind that counter. "I'm telling you again," Derek said, and his voice had the particular pitch of someone trying to sound firm when they were actually terrified. I can't let you take merchandise without payment. That's the policy. That's not me. I'm not asking for charity. The biker's voice was low, not loud. That was the thing about it. He didn't raise it, which somehow made it carry more weight than shouting would have. I'm asking you to let me take $12 of medical supplies and I will pay you back tomorrow morning. You can see my face, you know my club. I'm not going anywhere. Sir, I can't. I need gauze, antiseptic, medical tape. He said each word carefully like he was explaining something to a child. The cut on my arm is deeper than I thought and I need to clean it out before it gets infected. That's all I'm asking. Sir, our policy. I don't care about your policy, still not loud, just final. I care about my arm. Derek glanced toward the door, probably hoping for a customer to come in or a manager or God himself, and that's when his eyes landed on Jasmine. She was standing just inside the entrance with her coat still on and her work bag over one shoulder, and she had not moved since the door swung shut behind her. She was watching all of this with the expression of a woman who has used up her last reserve of patience sometime around midnight and now has nothing left but pure, unfiltered reaction. Derek gave her a look. The look said, "Please help me." Jasmine gave him a look back. Her look said, "You're on your own." She walked to the drinks aisle, got a water, and went to the medical supplies section, which was a 4-foot section of shelving wedged between the pain relievers and the feminine hygiene products. She found the gauze. She found the antiseptic spray. She found the medical tape. She picked them all up, looked at the prices, totaled it in her head, $11.47. She looked at the water in her hand, $1.19. Total $12.66. She had $8.63. She stood there for a moment in the middle of that aisle holding 4 items and doing math she already knew the answer to. Her stomach was empty. She'd worked 8 hours on her feet. She had 3.5 miles still to walk home. She needed that water. She needed, honestly, a lot more than water. What she did not need, by any rational measurement of her situation, was to get involved in whatever was happening at the front counter. She walked back to the front of the store. "How much is the gauze?" she asked. Derek blinked. $3.49. Antiseptic, $4.19. Tape, $2.89. She put the water on the counter. She pulled out her phone and opened her banking app, which she probably should not have done because seeing the number never helped anything. $8.63. She looked at it for 1 second, then put the phone away. "Ring up the gauze, the antiseptic, and the tape," she said. Derek stared at her. "Ma'am, do you need me to say it again?" The biker had not moved. He was watching her now with an expression she couldn't quite read, not gratitude, not confusion. Something between the two, and underneath both of them was something else. Calibration, maybe. Like a man running a quiet calculation. "You don't have to do that," he said. His voice was different when he spoke to her. Not softer exactly, but different. Like he dropped the layer of management he'd been using on Derek and was just talking. "I know I don't," Jasmine said. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching Derek scan the items. "I'm doing it so this situation ends and I can go home." "That's $12.57 for those 3, Derek said. She did not have $12.57. She had $8.63. She knew this. She'd known it before she walked up to the counter. And still she had walked up to the counter, which was the kind of thing that happened to her, sometimes her body making a decision before her brain had finished the argument. "Just the gauze and the antiseptic," she said. "Skip the tape." $7.68. She paid it. $8.63 became 85 cents in about 4 seconds. She did not look at the biker while this was happening. She did not look at Derek. She looked at the small black screen that confirmed the transaction, and she felt the specific hollowness of a person who has done something right and knows it was wrong for them. She picked up her water, then she put it back because she had 85 cents and the water was $1.19. "Keep the change," she said, which was something people said when they tipped, not when they paid for a stranger's medical supplies, but she said it anyway because she needed to say something, and that was what came out. She pushed toward the door. "Wait." She stopped. She did not turn around immediately. She stood with her hand on the push bar of the door and took one breath. Then she turned. The biker was looking at her directly. He'd straightened up from the counter. Standing at full height, he was well over 6 feet, which she'd known, but it hit differently now that he was facing her. He had pale eyes, gray or blue, hard to tell in the fluorescent light, and they were very still. "What's your name?" he asked. "Jasmine." He nodded once slowly like he was filing it somewhere permanent. "Cole Maddox." "Okay," she said. "I owe you." "You don't owe me anything. I did it to end the argument. Have a good night, Cole." She pushed through the door, and the February cold came back like it had been waiting for her personally. She made it half a block before she felt the full weight of what she'd done. 85 cents. She had 85 cents in a 3-mile walk home and no food in the apartment worth mentioning, and payday wasn't until Friday. She'd spent $7.78 on a stranger's medical supplies because she was tired and irritated, and sometimes when she was tired and irritated, her instincts were smarter than her common sense, and she hated that about herself. She walked. The city was quiet, the way cities are quiet at 2 in the morning, not peaceful, just paused. The streetlights had the yellow color of something old and underfunded. Her boots hit the pavement in a rhythm that she'd learned to use like a metronome, something to keep her moving when moving felt like too much. She didn't let herself think about the money yet. She'd think about it in the morning. Right now, she just needed to get home. She was 3 blocks from the store when she heard the motorcycle, not coming toward her, not threatening, just the sound of a large engine starting up somewhere behind her, and then the particular growl of it moving away in the opposite direction. She didn't turn around. She pulled her coat tighter and kept walking. She thought about tomorrow. She had 2 packets of instant oatmeal and half a can of black beans in the apartment. That was breakfast and maybe lunch. For dinner, she'd have to figure something out. Maybe someone at work would have something, or she'd check if the church on Millard Street had any kind of food distribution on Wednesday evenings. She'd been to that church once before. The woman at the door had been kind about it, hadn't made her feel like a project. She didn't like needing things. That was the specific, particular misery of her situation, not just the having nothing, but the having to need. She'd been raised by a mother who said that needing was fine, but depending was dangerous. And Jasmine had taken that so deep into her bones that even accepting help from a church food table felt like a kind of defeat she had to argue herself through every time. She got home at 3:07 in the morning. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor of a building that had once been decent and was now managing. The hallway smell was the hallway smell, old carpet, old cooking, something faintly chemical from the unit below hers, where a woman named Pat did something with crafting that always seemed to involve strong adhesive. Jasmine unlocked her door, went in, took off her boots, and sat on the edge of her bed in the dark for a while before she turned the light on. The apartment was small and clean. She kept it clean. That was the one thing she controlled, the cleanliness of the space she came home to. The dishes were done. The floor was swept. The small table by the window had a library book on it and a mug she hadn't washed yet from this morning's coffee. Everything in its place. She ate 4 crackers, the last of a sleeve she found in the cabinet, and drank tap water and got into bed. She lay there thinking about the biker's face, not about Cole Maddox himself, not about the Hells Angels, just about the moment when he'd straightened up and looked at her directly and said her name back to her like it was something he was keeping. Jasmine, like the word meant something to him now. She told herself it didn't mean anything. People said things. In the moment, things felt weighty and significant, and then time passed, and they were just things that happened at 2 a.m. in a convenience store. He'd find a payphone or a brother or whatever bikers did when they needed help, and he'd get home, and he'd wake up tomorrow, and she'd be nothing but a vague memory of a woman in a work coat who paid for some gauze. She fell asleep telling herself this. She woke up at 10:15, and the hunger was immediate and physical and impossible to negotiate with. Her stomach had given up on subtle signals and was just broadcasting loudly. She lay still for a minute, willing it to quiet down, then got up and made the oatmeal. 1 packet. She stood in her kitchen eating it over the sink because if she sat at the table, she'd just see how small the portion was. She had classes on Tuesdays, not college, not yet, but a computer skills course at the community center she'd signed up for because she thought it might help her get out of the warehouse eventually. The class was at 1 in the afternoon. She had 3 hours to kill and no money to kill them with, so she stayed in the apartment and read and tried not to think about lunch. At 11:30, someone knocked on her door. She was not expecting anyone. Nobody came to her door except her neighbor, Mrs. Elaine, occasionally, and the mailman never knocked. She went to the door and looked through the peephole and saw a broad male shape in a leather vest, and her heart did a full stop. She opened the door. It was not Cole Maddox. It was a different biker, younger, maybe 35, with dark hair and a beard in the same Hells Angels vest. He was standing in her hallway with an expression that was not unfriendly, but was not warm either. Just neutral. Waiting. "Jasmine Carter," he said. "Yes. My name's Trick." He didn't offer a hand to shake. He just stood there in the way people stand when they're comfortable with their own presence. "Cole Maddox asked me to bring you something." He held out an envelope. She looked at it. It was a plain white envelope, not sealed with nothing written on the outside. "I don't want his money," she said. "It's not money." She took the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper. On the paper, in handwriting that was careful and deliberate, were 9 words I don't forget. "Neither does my club." "Cole," she read it twice. "That's it?" she asked. "That's it," Trick said. He looked at her with the same neutral measuring expression. "He wanted you to have that today. He said you should know it was received." "What was received?" "What you did." "I spent $8 on gauze." Trick almost smiled. "Not quite." "Yes, ma'am." That's not a thing. People do that. People help each other." "Some people do," Trick said. "Not many. Not at 2 in the morning for a stranger." She didn't know what to say to that. She stood holding the envelope and looked at this man in her hallway and tried to figure out what was happening. "Cole's fine, by the way," Trick said. "Cleaned the cutout, got stitched up this morning. He wanted you to know." "Okay," she said. "Good, I'm glad. He'll be in touch." "He really doesn't need to be." Trick looked at her steadily. "I know you believe that," he said, and then he nodded once, turned around, and walked back down the hallway. She heard his boots on the stairs, measured and heavy, and then the main door of the building opened and closed. She stood in her doorway for a moment, then closed her own door and sat down on the couch with the envelope in her hands. "I don't forget, neither does my club." She put the paper on the table next to the library book and thought about it for a few minutes. Then she thought about lunch. Then she went to her computer skills class. Wednesday passed and Thursday passed, and she thought about Cole Maddox, the way you think about a strange dream less and less as the hours accumulated until it started to feel like something that had happened to someone else. She told her coworker Bria about it on Thursday night during their break, and Bria's response was immediate and visceral. "Jasmine, a Hell's Angel. Are you serious? It was fine. He was just hurt. He needed gauze." "Do you know what the Hells Angels are? I know what a motorcycle club is." "That's not just a motorcycle club, that's—" Bria lowered her voice, even though they were alone in the break room. "My uncle used to live over in Greenfield County, and he said the Hells Angels over there were into all kinds of things. Drug running, intimidation, serious stuff. This man needed gauze for a cut on his arm, Bria. And now he sent someone to your apartment. He sent a note." Bria stared at her. "Why does that sound worse?" Jasmine laughed, which was the first time she'd laughed since before the weekend. "I don't know, it's fine. I'm not scared. Maybe you should be a little scared." "I'm too tired to be scared. I used up all my scared on rent last month." Bria shook her head, but she was almost smiling. "You are a strange woman, Jasmine Carter. Tell me something I don't know." She got her paycheck on Friday, and it was $489 after taxes and deductions, which was both more and less than it should have been, and exactly enough to cover rent and the minimum on her electric bill and leave her with $60 for the next 2 weeks. She bought groceries, rice, dried beans, a bag of frozen chicken, thighs, bread, peanut butter, 2 cans of soup. She carried the bags home on the bus and felt for about 40 minutes like she had her feet under her. Saturday morning she did laundry. Saturday afternoon she read. Saturday evening she made rice and beans and ate at her small table and felt the specific quiet of a person who is alone and has made a kind of peace with it, not happiness exactly, but the steadiness of someone who has stopped fighting the silence. It was at 9:17 on Saturday evening that her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. She picked it up instead. "Jasmine." Cole Maddox had a voice that you remembered. That was the thing about it. It wasn't loud and it wasn't particularly warm, but it occupied space in a way that stayed with you. "Cole," she said, a pause. "Then how are you, Tiara?" "Fine. How's your arm?" "Stitched, clean, Good as it's going to get. Another pause, and this one had a different quality. Not hesitation, just the pause of a man who thinks before he speaks and is actually thinking. I wanted to call you myself, not send somebody else. You didn't have to call at all. I know. The note was enough, more than enough. I don't expect anything. I know you don't, he said. That's exactly why I'm calling. She didn't respond right away. She sat at her kitchen table with her phone against her ear, and outside the window, the Saturday evening sounds of the neighborhood moved through someone's television. A car that needed a new exhaust. A kid shouting something 2 buildings over. What are you calling to say, Cole? That I'm in your debt, he said. Not money, not things. Debt. There's a difference. You don't owe me a debt. I bought you gauze. You bought me gauze when you had $8 to your name and 3 miles to walk home in February. The specificity of it stopped her. How do you know all that? I asked. You asked who? Trick talked to some people. He said it simply without apology. I needed to know who you were. So you investigated me. I made sure you were real. The way he said it, not defensive, just factual. People do things and sometimes they're trying to get something out of it. I needed to know if you were trying to get something. I wasn't trying to get anything. I told you that. I know. That's what Trick found out. He paused. You work nights at Harmon Warehouse. You've been there 2.5 years. Your car broke down in January. You take the bus. You're behind on 1 credit card, and your electric bill ran late twice last winter. You live alone. The list of facts sat in her chest like a weight. Not because they were wrong, they were entirely right, but because hearing them listed out loud by someone else made her own life feel like something being appraised. That's a lot of information about a person you met once, she said. Yes. And what do you do with it? I told you, he said. I owe you a debt, knowing you as part of paying it. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the window, the car with the bad exhaust went past again. I don't know what to do with that, she finally said. You don't have to do anything with it, Cole said. I'm just telling you how it is in my world. You helped me when I was bleeding and stranded and couldn't pay for what I needed. In my world, that's not a small thing. In my world, that's the kind of thing a person remembers for the rest of their life. It was $12 of medical supplies. It was the principle of it. His voice was still quiet. You didn't know me. You didn't know my club. You'd never seen me before in your life. And you stood at that counter and paid for me anyway. That's not nothing, Jasmine. She turned that over in her mind. She'd heard what he was saying, but the framing of it was strange to her, this idea that such a small, practical, irritated act could carry this kind of weight. She'd done it to stop an argument. She'd done it because standing in that cold store watching a man bleed while a scared kid hid behind policy was more than she could take. I just didn't want to watch it anymore, she said. That's all. Cole was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was different, just barely, just at the edges. Sometimes that's enough, he said. Sometimes that's everything. She didn't have anything to say to that. Get some sleep, Cole said. I'll be in touch. He hung up before she could tell him again that he didn't have to be. She sat at the kitchen table for a while after that with her phone face down in front of her. She thought about what Bria had said. She thought about the note. She thought about the voice of a man who spoke like every word cost something, and so he didn't waste them. She went to bed. She slept better than she had in weeks, which she couldn't explain and didn't try to. Sunday was quiet. Monday was work. She picked up an extra half shift starting at 9 instead of 10 because extra money was extra money, and she didn't say no to it. She was on the floor moving a pallet of water coolers when her phone buzzed in her pocket. Break wasn't for another hour, but she pulled it out for 1 second just to see. Cole Maddox. She put it back in her pocket and finished the pallet. On break, she called him back. You're working, he said when he answered. I'm on break. I called to let you know something. He paused. The brothers want to meet you. The word brothers. She'd known intellectually that the Hells Angels was a club, an organization, a brotherhood, all of that, but hearing him say it in that particular way made it real in a new dimension. Why? She asked. Because of what you did. Cole, I've explained this. I know what you've explained, he said, and there was something in his voice that was not impatience, but was something adjacent to it, the tone of a man who has heard an argument and considered it and still disagrees. I'm not asking for your permission. I'm telling you what's going to happen. The chapter wants to meet the woman who stood with me. That's our way. I didn't stand with you. I paid for gauze. Jasmine. Just her name. Just 2 syllables, but he put something in them. A quiet certainty that was not threatening, but was not optional either. Stop arguing about what you did. What you did means something. Let it mean something, and she was quiet. When she finally asked, soon, he said, I wanted you to be ready. Ready for what exactly? But he'd already gone. She stood in the break room of the Harmon distribution warehouse at 11:45 on a Monday night with her half-eaten vending machine crackers in one hand and her phone in the other, and she thought about what soon meant. She thought it meant something different to a Hell's Angel than it did to her. She went back to work. She moved the rest of the pallets. She clocked out at 6 a.m. and caught the bus and got home at 6:45 and ate peanut butter on bread and set her alarm for 2 in the afternoon. She fell asleep immediately. Outside her window, somewhere on the streets of this city that nobody remembered anymore, engines were quiet. For now. She slept through her alarm, not by a little, by 3 hours. She woke up at 5 in the afternoon with her face pressed into her pillow, and that particular disorientation of someone who has slept so hard, their body forgot what day it was. She lay still for a moment, blinking at the ceiling, and then the full sequence of the last few days came back to her in order: the store, the biker, the note, the phone calls, and she sat up. Her apartment was dim. The light coming through the curtains had the flat gray quality of late afternoon in February, the kind of light that doesn't illuminate anything so much as just reduce the darkness slightly. She sat on the edge of her bed and rubbed her face with both hands and tried to decide how she felt. She felt rested, which was unusual. She felt something else too, something she couldn't name immediately, a low-grade alertness that hadn't been there before. Like some part of her that had been asleep longer than just the afternoon had woken up alongside her body. She didn't like it. She distrusted it the way she distrusted anything that felt like hope before she'd verified it. She made coffee. She stood at her kitchen window while it brewed and looked out at the street below, which was doing its usual Tuesday evening things: a woman walking a small dog, a delivery truck double parked with its hazards blinking, 2 men outside the building across the street, having a conversation that involved a lot of hands. Normal. Ordinary. The city doing what the city did regardless of what happened to any one person inside it. Good, she told herself. Good. Normal is good. Cole Maddox and his note and his phone calls were an interruption in normal, and interruptions ended and normal resumed. That was how it worked. That was how it should work. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number, but a different unknown number than Cole's. She answered it anyway because she always answered unknown numbers, a habit left over from a period when she'd been waiting for calls about jobs and apartments and things that required answering. Is this Jasmine Carter? A woman's voice. Middle-aged, businesslike, but not cold. Yes. My name is Sandra Reeves. I'm the HR coordinator at Harmon Distribution. I'm calling about your schedule for next week. Jasmine's stomach dropped about 3 inches. HR calling on a Tuesday evening was not about good news. HR calling on a Tuesday evening was about something being wrong with your schedule, your file, your employment status. She gripped the phone a little tighter. Is there a problem? She asked. Not exactly a problem, Sandra said with the careful phrasing of a person who is about to deliver something complicated. We've been doing some restructuring of the overnight team roster. We're reducing third shift by 4 positions effective next Monday. I'm sorry to tell you that your position is one of the ones being eliminated. The room didn't change. The coffee maker kept doing its last gurgle. The street outside kept being the street outside. Jasmine stood in her kitchen and heard the sentence and let it travel all the way through her before she responded. I've been there 2.5 years, she said. I know. And you have a strong work record. This isn't performance related at all. It's purely structural. The company, I've been there 2.5 years, Jasmine said again. Not arguing, just saying it out loud because it felt like it needed to be said out loud by someone, since apparently it hadn't meant what she thought it meant. You'll receive 2 weeks of severance, Sandra said, and we'll provide a letter of recommendation. You're eligible for unemployment. I can send you the information. Don't send me the information tonight, Jasmine said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. She was the kind of person whose voice stayed steady when her insides weren't, which was both a skill and a curse. Send it tomorrow. I'll look at it tomorrow. Of course. Again, I'm very sorry. Thank you for calling, Jasmine said and hung up. She stood there. The coffee finished brewing. She poured herself a cup and added nothing to it and drank it black, standing at the window. Fired. She'd been fired, or laid off. They'd call it laid off, but the result was the same. Friday's $489 check was going to be the last one for a while. The $60 she had left in her account was going to have to stretch until unemployment came through, which took time, which meant she had to figure out the gap. She thought about rent. She thought about the electric bill. She thought about the half bag of rice in her cabinet and the 2 cans of soup and the bread that would last maybe 3 more days. She put the coffee cup down very carefully, like if she was careless with it, something would break, and she went and sat on the couch. This was the thing about her life, the thing she had never quite gotten used to, even after 26 years of living it. The way it could be going along in its difficult, manageable way, and then one phone call could move the ground under you. One call, 4 minutes, and everything you'd built, the schedule, the routine, the math that barely worked had to be rebuilt from scratch. She sat there for a while. Then she picked up her phone and called Bria. Bria answered on the second ring. Hey, didn't you sleep all day? How are you? I just got laid off. Silence. Then what? HR called, restructuring, 3rd shift reduction. Effective Monday. Jasmine. Bria's voice shifted into something real and immediate. Oh no. Oh, are you okay? I'm fine. You're not fine. Your voice does that thing. What thing? That flat thing. When you're not fine, but you're deciding to be fine. You do it every time something bad happens. Jasmine opened her mouth to say she didn't do a thing and closed it again because Bria had known her for a year and a half and probably knew her voice well enough by now. I'll figure it out, Jasmine said. What do you need? Do you need anything right now? I can come over? You work tonight. I can call in. Bria, don't call in. I'm fine. I just needed to tell someone. A pause. Okay, Bria said quietly. But you call me if you need anything. Anytime, you hear me? I hear you. She hung up and sat with the phone in her lap and the gray February light going darker by the minute outside the window. The thing she wasn't saying, not to Bria, not to herself out loud, was that she'd known this was possible. The warehouse had been making noises about restructuring for months. She'd heard it in the break room and the locker room, in the way management had stopped making eye contact with the overnight crew during the last 2 walkthroughs. She'd known it was possible, and she'd done the thing she always did, which was push it to the back of her mind, because thinking about it wouldn't stop it, and she had enough to think about in the present. She'd been right that thinking about it wouldn't stop it. She'd also been wrong to be surprised. She made herself eat rice and 1 can of soup combined into something that was technically a meal, and then she went through her accounts on her phone with the thoroughness of a person taking stock before a long trip. $62.14 in checking, no savings account, or rather a savings account with $11 in it that she kept because closing it entirely felt like giving up. 2 weeks of severance coming. Unemployment eventually. The timeline between eventually and now was where the problem lived. Her phone rang at 8:47 p.m. Cole. She answered it. My night's getting worse, she said instead of hello. So whatever you're calling about, maybe table it. A pause. What happened? She hadn't planned to tell him. The words came out anyway, and she told herself it was because she'd already told Bria, and it was easier the second time, not because there was something about his particular steadiness on the phone that made telling him feel like putting something down. I got laid off tonight. The warehouse. Restructuring. Silence on his end. Not the silence of someone who doesn't know what to say, the silence of someone absorbing. How long have you worked there? 2.5 years. And they called you on a Tuesday evening to tell you. HR called. He stopped, started again. I'm sorry, Jasmine. The simplicity of it hit her harder than any complicated response would have. Not, I'm sorry that happened, or I'm sorry for your loss, or any of the constructed sounding phrases people used. Just, I'm sorry, Jasmine. Like he meant exactly those words and no others. I'll figure it out, she said. It was what she always said. I know you will, he said. That's not in question. A pause. Are you all right tonight? I'm fine. You're the second person I've ever heard say I'm fine in a way that meant the opposite. She almost smiled. Almost. Who was the first? My wife, he said, a long time ago. The word wife landed in the conversation and changed the shape of it slightly. She hadn't thought of Cole Maddox as a man with a wife. She'd thought of him as a biker, a presence, a force of some kind, not as a man with ordinary relationships and ordinary losses. What happened? She asked. She died, he said, simply, 12 years ago. Cancer. I'm sorry. I know. And the way he said it, the same simplicity she'd given him, returned exactly made something in her chest do a small, quiet thing she didn't have a name for. They were both quiet for a moment. Get some sleep, he said. Don't spend tonight doing the math on everything. It'll still be there in the morning. That's easier said. I know, he said. Do it anyway. She almost told him that she didn't take instructions well. She stopped herself because she'd noticed something when Cole Maddox told her to do something. It didn't sound like an instruction. It sounded like information, like he was simply reporting what was true and what would be better and leaving the choice to her. She went to sleep earlier than she expected to. Wednesday, she woke up and did the math anyway because, of course, she did, and it was as bad as she'd thought, but not unsurvivable. She mapped out 6 weeks' rent covered by severance utilities, tight but manageable food requiring serious discipline, 6 weeks until unemployment either came through or she had to go back to figuring out the next thing. She updated her resume. That was the practical thing. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop, an old machine she kept alive through stubbornness, and 2 YouTube tutorials about hard drive maintenance, and updated her resume and put it on the job sites and tried not to feel the particular humiliation of doing this again. She'd done this before. She'd done it twice before this job. She knew how to do it. She knew the rhythm of applying and waiting, and the silence that meant no, and the occasional response that meant maybe. She knew all of it, and knowing it didn't make it easier, but it made it familiar, which was something. At noon, Trick knocked on her door. She recognized him through the peephole this time, broad-billed, dark beard, the vest. She opened the door. Cole didn't call you, he said. It wasn't really a question. He didn't mention you were coming. Trick nodded like this was consistent with something he already knew. He sensed something. He held out a paper bag, a grocery store bag, not a gift bag, just a plain brown paper bag with the handles twisted together. She looked at it. I told him I didn't want... It's not from him, Trick said. It's from his sister. She heard you lost your job. She made food. Jasmine stared at him. His sister. Ruth, she cooks when people are going through things. She's been doing it since we were kids. He said it the way you talk about a sibling's habit, with the fond exasperation of someone who's been on the receiving end of it many times. She doesn't know you personally, but she heard about you, and she made a pot of chili and some cornbread, and she said to tell you it freezes well. Jasmine took the bag. It was warm. The smell coming through the paper was immediate and real, and the kind of smell that reaches somewhere below your conscious mind and reminds you of being cared for before you were old enough to resist it. She had to look away for a second. Tell her thank you, she said when she had her face under control. She'll want to hear it from you eventually, Trick said. He didn't make it a big thing, just said it and then glanced down the hall. Cole's going to call you this afternoon. He's got something to ask you. What kind of something? Not my place to say. He looked back at her. You don't have to say yes to whatever it is. He knows that. He'll understand no. But Trick tilted his head slightly. But I've known Cole Maddox for 22 years, and when he asks something, it's usually worth hearing out. He nodded once. Good afternoon, Miss Carter. She stood in her doorway holding a warm bag of chili and cornbread made by a woman she'd never met, listening to Trick's boots go down the stairs, and thought about a world in which strangers cooked for you without being asked, and men showed up at your door delivering warmth before a conversation. She ate the chili at her kitchen table with the library book open next to her, and it was genuinely simply the best thing she'd eaten in months. Not because it was elaborate, but because it was made. There was a difference, she thought, between food that was assembled and food that was made, and Ruth, whoever she was, made food. Cole called at 2:15. You got the chili, he said. Your sister didn't have to do that. She wanted to. A pause. Ruth doesn't do things she doesn't want to do. You'll learn that about her. Jasmine almost asked what he meant. How was she going to learn anything about Ruth? But she let it go. Trick said you had something to ask me. I do. Cole paused in his particular way, the pause of actual thought, not of hesitation. I have a contact at Bergman Logistics. They're a distribution company on the west side of the city, bigger than Harmon, better pay rate, better hours. My contact there is the operations manager. He owes me a favor. Jasmine was quiet. I'm not offering you charity, Cole said before she could find the words. I'm offering you an introduction. Whether you get the wash depends on you. The interview, the qualifications, the work, all of you. I'd just be opening a door. She wanted to say no. The instinct to say no was immediate and strong. The self-reliance instinct, the one her mother had installed so deeply, it fired before she'd fully processed what was being offered. Why, she asked instead. Because you need work, and I know someone who's hiring. That's not Cole, that's not why I'm asking. I mean, why is this something you do? You don't know me. I know enough. His voice was even certain without being aggressive. I know you work hard. I know you've been at the same place for 2.5 years without a promotion or a raise worth mentioning, which means you're reliable, but you've been underestimated. I know you're smart enough to be using the community center to improve your skills, which most people in your situation don't bother with. And I know you had $8 and you spent most of it on a stranger. Each thing he said landed with the weight of something that had been studied, not guessed. You know a lot about me for someone I've spoken to 3 times, she said. I told you I asked. There's a difference between asking and she stopped. You had someone look into me, seriously look into yes. And that doesn't bother you, that it might bother me. A pause, the longest one he'd given her yet. It should probably bother you more than it does, he said. The fact that you're not more alarmed about it tells me something too. She thought about that. He was right, she should be more alarmed. The fact that a motorcycle club president had conducted what amounted to a background investigation on her life should have triggered every self-protective instinct she had. It hadn't quite, and she didn't fully understand why. What's your contact's name? She asked. She heard something shift in his voice, not surprise exactly, but a kind of settling, like a man who'd been holding himself very still and could now release it. Gary Ostrowski, he said. I'll let him know to expect your call. I'm not promising anything. I know. And if I get the job, it's because I earned it. I'd expect nothing else. She wrote the name down. After she hung up, she sat at the table looking at it. Gary Ostrowski, Bergman Logistics. She'd call tomorrow. She'd be professional and prepared, and she would earn whatever happened next. But she thought about Cole's voice when she'd said yes to hearing the information. That small settling, that particular quality of a person who'd been careful not to hope and was now quietly allowing themselves to. She thought about that for a while. She called Gary Ostrowski Thursday morning. He answered on the first ring, which meant Cole had already spoken to him, which she'd expected, but which still recalibrated something for her, the understanding that Cole's world moved faster and with more coordination than hers did. Gary was brisk and professional. He asked about her experience. She told him. He asked about her computer skills course. She told him about that too, feeling slightly less self-conscious about it than she usually did when it came up. He offered her an interview for the following Monday at 9 in the morning. She said yes and thanked him and hung up and sat with her hands flat on the table and breathed. Monday. She had a job interview Monday at a company that paid better and had better hours because a man she'd bought medical supplies for was returning what he considered a debt. She called Bria. I have a job interview Monday, she said. Bria screamed, genuinely screamed. Jasmine had to hold the phone away from her ear. At Bergman Logistics. Bergman, that place is twice the size of Harmon. How did you get an interview there already? Long story. Does it involve the biker? Jasmine paused half the beat too long. Oh my God, Bria said. It does involve the biker. He knows someone there. He just made an introduction. Jasmine, a Hell's Angel got you a job interview. He didn't get me a job. He got me an interview, which I will get on my own merits. I know, but still, Jasmine. A pause. How do you feel about all this? She'd asked herself the same question a dozen times since Tuesday evening. How did she feel about a man she didn't know involving himself in her life with this level of intention? How did she feel about the note? The called trick at her door, Ruth's Chili. Now a job lead. I feel like I need to make sure I understand what it is, she said. What do you mean? I mean, I don't know what this is. I don't know if this is just... She searched for the right word. Obligation, honor, whatever they call it, or if it's something else. Bria was quiet for a moment. Does it matter right now? It might. Or, Bria said carefully, it might be that someone is helping you and you're so unused to that you're trying to find the problem with it before you let yourself accept it. Jasmine didn't say anything. Just a thought, Bria said. Friday, she got a text from Cole. Not a call, a text the first time he texted her. It said, "How are you preparing for Monday?" She stared at it for a second, then typed back, "Reviewing my experience. Doing some research on the company." While his response came fast for a man she'd assumed didn't text much, "There's something you should know about Gary before you go in." She called him immediately. "Tell me," she said when he answered. "Gary respects directness more than anything," Cole said. "He'll ask you why you want to work there. Don't give him the polished answer. Give him the real one." "What's the real one? You tell me," he said. She thought about it. "I need work that pays enough to not be 3 days from a crisis every 2 weeks. I need to get ahead of something instead of just staying even with it. And I'm good at the work. I'm organized, I'm reliable, and I don't call in sick when I'm not sick." Silence. "That," Cole said, "is exactly what you tell Gary Ostrowski." She almost smiled. "How do you know that's better than the polished answer?" "Because Gary built that company from a single truck in 1998 and 3 people who quit on him in the first month. He doesn't trust Polish. He trusts people who know what they need and aren't ashamed of it." She hadn't known that about Bergman Logistics. She'd looked the company up, but she hadn't found that specific detail. Or maybe she'd found the press release version and not the real version. "Where'd you get that?" she asked. "Gary told me," Cole said simply. "We've known each other 15 years. We don't always move in the same circles, but we respect each other." A distribution company owner and a Hells Angels chapter president. "This city has surprising friendships," Cole said, and for the first time she heard something like dry humor in his voice. Just a thread of it, but it was there. She laughed. It came out of her before she made a decision about it, just a real brief, unguarded laugh. Cole was quiet for a half second after it in the way people are quiet when something catches them. "You have a good laugh," he said. She hadn't expected that. She didn't have a response prepared because she hadn't expected it, so she said nothing for a moment and felt the particular discomfort of a compliment received without deflection. "Thank you," she finally said. "Go prepare for your interview," he said. His voice was back to its usual register, steady even. "Call me Monday after." "You want me to report back?" "I want to know how it goes." "Cole," she paused, "why does it matter this much to you?" The question sat between them. She heard him breathe once slowly. "Because," he said, "I've been in this world long enough to know that when someone does a decent thing without any expectation attached, the world usually just takes it and moves on without looking back. I don't like that. I've never liked that. You did something decent, and I intend to make sure it doesn't go unnoticed. Not for my sake. For yours." She held the phone and didn't speak. "Go prepare," he said quietly. She did. Saturday, she pressed her good interview clothes, the dark slacks and the white button-up she saved for applications, and Sunday she reviewed everything she could find about Bergman Logistics and made notes in her notebook in small, careful handwriting. Sunday evening, her phone rang. Not Cole. Trick. "Miss Carter." Trick. She was surprised. He'd never called her directly before. "Everything okay?" "Fine," he said. "I'm calling because Cole asked me to." A pause, and she could hear something in the background voices, the particular ambient sound of a large, indoor space, maybe music turned low. "He wanted me to tell you something he wasn't going to say himself." She waited. "He's been talking about you to the brothers," Trick said. Not in a personal way. Just telling them what happened. What you did." He told the whole story at chapel last week. She'd heard the word chapel before in relation to motorcycle clubs, the formal meetings where club business was conducted. The word had a specific weight coming from Trick. "Why is he telling me this?" she asked. "Because what I'm about to say is going to happen whether or not you're ready for it," Trick said, and his voice was very matter-of-fact. "And he thought you deserved a heads up." "What's going to happen?" "The brothers want to do something for you," Trick said. "All of them. Not Cole, the whole chapter." They took a vote. It was unanimous. She stood very still. What kind of something? The kind of something we do when one of our own is owed a debt and we want to settle it as a club. I'm not one of your own. No, Trick said, but Cole is. And what was done for Cole is now something the whole club holds. That's how it works with us. He paused. I don't know exactly what form it's going to take yet. Cole and the officers are working it out. But I wanted you to know it's coming, so you're not caught off guard. She sat down on the couch. Her legs had made the decision before she did. When, she asked? Soon, Trick said. The word landed the exact same way it had landed when Cole said it on the phone last week. Soon. The same word, the same quality, not vague, not uncertain, but compressed, like a thing that already existed in some immediate future and was simply traveling toward her. Trick, she said. Yes, ma'am. Is this, I need to ask you directly. Is this safe? Should I be worried? A pause, and she appreciated that he took the question seriously instead of dismissing it. For you specifically, he said. No, you're not in any danger. I give you my word on that. Your word. My word, he said with a finality that she believed without fully understanding why she believed it. What's coming is not something you need to be afraid of, but it is something that's going to be larger than you're expecting. She processed that. How much larger? Considerably, Trick said, and she could hear just underneath the word the ghost of something, not quite a smile, but close. He hung up. She sat on her couch in the Sunday evening quiet of her apartment and thought about the word considerably. She turned it over. She tried to imagine what considerably meant in the context of 340 motorcycle club members who had taken a unanimous vote about doing something for a warehouse worker who spent $8 on a stranger. She couldn't imagine it. Not fully. Whatever shape she tried to build in her mind, it didn't quite fit. She told herself she'd find out eventually. She told herself to focus on the interview tomorrow. She got her clothes out of the closet and hung them on the door where she'd see them in the morning, and she made a cup of tea, and she sat at the kitchen table with the library book open and the tea getting cool and the notebook full of Bergman logistics facts beside her. Her phone stayed quiet the rest of the night. Outside the window, the city did its quiet Sunday thing, cars' voices, the distant sound of something she couldn't identify. She'd lived here long enough to know its sounds the way you know a person's breathing patterns. Familiar, unremarkable. She went to bed at 10. She did not sleep easily. She lay in the dark and thought about considerably, and about 340 unanimous votes, and about a man who had told her she had a good laugh with the same tone he used for facts, and about a woman named Ruth she'd never met who made chili for people she'd never met because that was simply what Ruth did. She thought about Trick's voice when he said, what's coming is not something you need to be afraid of. She believed him. She didn't know why she believed him. She had no logical reason to trust any of these people. She knew almost nothing about them beyond what the word Hell's Angels conjured, and what it conjured wasn't reassuring. But trust, she was learning, didn't always follow logic. Sometimes it followed something quieter and harder to name, the accumulated weight of small consistencies. The note delivered, the calls made, the chili brought warm, the job lead offered without strings. A chapter president who gathered 22 years of friendship with a logistics manager and used it to open a door for a woman he'd known less than 2 weeks. Consistent, she thought. Whatever else they were, and she wasn't naive about what else they might be, they were consistent. She held on to that. She fell asleep finally somewhere past midnight. And in the morning, she was going to walk into Bergman Logistics and tell Gary Ostrowski the real answer, not the polished one, because a biker with pale gray eyes and a voice that didn't waste words had told her that was how you earn something real. And she was going to earn it. She got the job. Gary Ostrowski shook her hand at the end of the interview, a firm two-pump handshake, the kind that means something in the world of people who built things from nothing, and told her she could start the following Monday. $16.80 an hour. Day shift, benefits after 90 days. She walked out of the Bergman Logistics building into the February cold and stood on the sidewalk and didn't move for about 30 seconds. She just stood there with the wind on her face and let it be real. Then she called Cole. He answered on the second ring. How'd it go? I got it. A pause. Not long, but full. Good ident, he said, and the word was simple and complete and carried more weight than a longer response would have. I told him the real answer, she said, Like you said. I know you did. You don't know that. You got the job, he said. That's how I know. She almost laughed. She was standing on a sidewalk in February, having just gotten her first real piece of good news in longer than she could immediately remember. And she was on the phone with a Hells Angels chapter president who spoke in the tone of a man who never needed to say, I told you so, because the facts said it for him. Thank you, she said. She meant it completely. You did the work, he said. I just opened the door. Cole, Jasmine, I mean it. Thank you. Another pause, and in it, she heard something that she was beginning to recognize, the sound of Cole Maddox accepting something without deflecting it. A man who made space for a real thing instead of immediately minimizing it. You're welcome, he said, and then celebrate tonight. Don't think about anything else. She did. She called Bria, who screamed again. She bought herself a rotisserie chicken from the grocery store, an actual luxury, the kind she normally walked past, and she ate at her kitchen table with the good light on, and something that wasn't quite happiness, but was close enough that she stopped trying to define the difference. She slept well. The second night in a row. She was beginning to suspect Cole Maddox was somehow responsible for that too, which was irrational, and she held the irrationality without fighting it. On Tuesday, she started thinking about what Trick had said, considerably. She'd let herself not think about it through the interview, through the job offer, through Monday evening. Now it came back the way things do when you've successfully delayed them, all at once fully formed with the patient energy of something that had simply been waiting. 340 men had voted unanimously to do something for her. She still didn't know what. She still didn't know when. Cole hadn't called since Monday morning. Trick hadn't texted. The days were passing in a particular kind of quiet that she didn't entirely trust, the quiet of a held breath. She texted Cole on Tuesday afternoon. Just, is there anything I should know? He responded 20 minutes later. Not yet. Soon. There was that word again. She stared at it and then put the phone down and went back to her laptop in the job orientation paperwork Gary had emailed her. Wednesday, she went to her computer skills class, and on the walk home, she passed the Quick Mart. She slowed without meaning to. The door was the same door. The little bell above it was the same bell. Derek was visible through the window in his blue vest, doing something with the lottery ticket display. She stood outside for a moment. 2.5 weeks. That's how long it had been since 2:14 a.m. and $8.63, and a man bleeding on her ordinary Wednesday night. 2.5 weeks, and her life had moved, not dramatically, not all at once, but it had moved in ways she couldn't have predicted. An introduction, chilly from a stranger. Phone calls at night from a man who didn't waste words, and something coming that Trick had called considerable, which she still couldn't shape into anything concrete no matter how many times she tried. She went inside and bought a bottle of water she could afford. A bottle of water. Now she reminded herself she had a job starting Monday, and Derek looked up and nodded and didn't recognize her, which was fine. She was just a person who'd been here once in the middle of the night. She was no one in particular to Derek. She was apparently someone in particular to 340 other people. She paid for the water and left. Thursday passed. Friday passed. She completed her orientation paperwork and sent it back to Gary's office. She talked to Bria on Friday night and told her about the start date, and they made plans to get dinner when Jasmine got her first Bergman check. Real dinner, Bria said. Not fast food. Jasmine agreed. Saturday morning, she cleaned her apartment the way she cleaned it when she needed to feel in control of something. Every surface, the baseboards, the inside of the refrigerator, which involved throwing out 3 things she'd been avoiding, acknowledging. She was on her knees scrubbing the bathroom floor at 9:47 a.m. when her phone rang on the counter. She stood up and looked at it. Cole. Morning, she said. Morning? His voice was different. Not alarm Cole Maddox did not alarm, but there was something in it that was more awake than his usual register. More present. What are you doing today? Cleaning. Why? Are you going to be home this morning? She looked at the scrub brush in her hand. I don't have any plans to leave. Good. A pause. I need you to stay home this morning. Can you do that? She put the scrub brush down. Cole, what's happening? Stay home, he said. I'll explain when I get there. When you get here, you're coming here. Yes. Cole. Jasmine. His voice had that quality again, not a command, just a fact being delivered. Trust me for one more hour. Can you do that? She stood in her bathroom with a damp knee and looked at herself in the mirror for a second. She thought about the accumulated weight of small consistencies. The note, the calls, the chili, the door, every small thing that had been exactly what it said it was. 1 hour, she said. Good, I'll see you soon. He hung up. She finished the bathroom. She changed out of her cleaning clothes and into real ones. She made coffee and stood at the window with it watching the street below, which was doing its ordinary Saturday morning things. A woman walking about, a man in a heavy coat checking his mailbox, a kid on a bike weaving around a parked delivery van. Normal, everything normal. She checked the time. 9:52. She'd given him an hour. She'd used the hour. She sat at the kitchen table and drank her coffee and read 12 pages of her library book and did not let herself think about what considerably meant or what was coming or why Cole was coming here personally for the first time instead of sending Trick. At 10:34, her building began to shake. Not the whole building, just the windows. A vibration that started low and built like distant thunder that didn't stop at a single crack, but kept coming, kept growing, kept layering itself. She put her book down. She looked at the window. The glass was trembling in the frame, just slightly, just perceptibly the way glass trembles when something massive is producing sound at a frequency it can feel. She stood up. The sound was unmistakable once she identified it. Engines, not one engine, not 10, a massive collective rolling thunder of engines that was still growing as it approached, which meant there was more of it still coming from wherever it was coming from. She crossed to the window and looked down at the street. The first motorcycles turned the corner at the end of the block, and she counted them automatically the way you count things your mind can't fully process, 1, 2, 5, 10, and they kept coming. They filled the lane. They filled both lanes. They came in rows, organized and deliberate, not a mob, but a formation, and the sound of them together was something that went past hearing into something more physical. She felt it in her sternum. She felt it in her back teeth. 20, 30, 50. Oh God, she said out loud to her empty apartment. They kept coming. She watched from her window, hands on the gas, and the motorcycles filled her street from corner to corner and kept arriving. Black leather, steel. The white background, red letter patches visible even from 2 floors up. Every man wearing the same vest, the same patches, and every one of them riding with that particular deliberate posture of people who are doing something intentional. 80, 100, still coming. Her neighbors were reacting. She could hear it, doors opening in the hallway, voices of a child saying something about motorcycles and an adult shushing them. From the building across the street, faces appeared in windows. A woman on the 3rd floor pressed her palm flat against the glass the way Jasmine had. A man on the 1st floor opened his front door, looked, and immediately closed it again. The whole street had stopped. Every car had stopped. Every person on foot had stopped. The ordinary Saturday morning of a forgotten American city had simply ceased while something unprecedented moved through it. 150, 200. Jasmine stepped back from the window. Her heart was doing something complicated. Not panic, not exactly, but the full-body alertness of a person standing at the edge of something they can't measure. She thought about Trick's voice, not something you need to be afraid of. She held on to that with both hands. Her phone rang. Cole. Look outside, he said. I'm already looking. Come to the door. Which door? Your front door. I'm in the hall. She lowered the phone. She crossed her apartment in 6 steps and opened the front door. Cole Maddox was standing in her hallway. She'd seen him once in a lit convenience store at 2 a.m, bleeding and leaning on a counter. She'd seen the size of him then, had registered it the way you register a fact, but she hadn't fully absorbed it. Standing in her hallway in the morning light, in his vest, in his gray hair, and his pale eyes with the sound of 300 engines shaking the building around them, Cole Maddox was the most present person she had ever encountered. He occupied the space around him differently than other people did. Not threateningly, just completely. His arms, she noticed, had a clean white bandage just visible below the sleeve of his flannel shirt. You could have warned me, she said. I was afraid you'd leave. She looked at him. You thought I'd run? I thought you'd overthink it and then run, he said. And there was the ghost of that dry humor again, the thread of it just underneath the surface. How many? She asked. 340, he said. The whole chapter. Every man who could ride. Cole. She didn't know what else to say. Just his name. Can I come in? He asked. She stepped back and he came into her apartment, this large, quiet, gray-haired man who had upended the last 2.5 weeks of her life, and she closed the door behind him. The sound of the engines was muffled now, but still present, still felt more than heard. He stood in the middle of her small living room and looked around once briefly in the way someone looks at a space when they're getting a true picture of it and not decorating it with assumptions. He took in the clean floor, the library book on the table, the coffee mug, the small refrigerator visible through the kitchen doorway. He didn't say anything about any of it. Sit down, she said, because it was her home and she would be the one to offer. He sat on the couch. She sat in the single chair across from it, and they faced each other with the rumble of 340 motorcycles providing a bass note to the conversation. Tell me what's happening, she said. The chapter voted, he said. I told you they would. I told you they wanted to do something. This is them doing it. 340 motorcycles on my street is them doing it. That's part of it, he said. The rest is downstairs. She looked at on. What's downstairs? Come see. He stood. She stood. He moved to the door and she followed him, and they went down the hallway and down the stairs, and he pushed open the building's main door, and the sound hit her first. Not just the engines now, but voices, movement, the organized noise of a large number of people doing something with purpose. She stepped out onto the sidewalk. The street was full of men in leather vests, but they weren't sitting on their bikes anymore. They dismounted, and they were moving, carrying things, organizing things, working. She saw a pickup truck she hadn't noticed from the window. Then another, then 2 more parked further up the block. The trucks were full. She saw it in stages the way you see something that's too large to take in all at once. Cardboard boxes stacked in truck beds, crates, coolers, paper bags, dozens of them organized in rows. She saw 2 men carrying a box between them that had the words rice 25 pounds printed on the side. She saw a man in his 50s unloading what appeared to be an entire flat of canned goods with the focused efficiency of someone who has unloaded things his whole life. She saw a folding table that someone had set up on the sidewalk and was loading with produce, actual produce, fresh vegetables, the bright, particular color of things that had been bought recently and handled carefully. She stood on the sidewalk and couldn't speak. Cole stood beside her. He didn't say anything either for a moment because he seemed to understand that she needed the moment to just exist in. Then we don't do charity, he said. It was the same thing Rick had said. The same phrasing in which meant it was something they actually said, a phrase that meant something specific in their world. We restore balance. You did something for me. The club does something for you. That's how we work. She stopped, started again. Cole, this is considerable, he said quietly. She looked at him. He wasn't smiling exactly, but his eyes had something in them that was warmer than his usual expression. Trick told me he used that word, Cole said. I told him it was an understatement. A man came up to them, older, heavy-set, with a gray-streaked beard and a road captain patch on his vest. He looked at Jasmine directly, not past her, not through her. At her. Ms. Carter, he said. His voice was gravel and courtesy in equal measure. I'm Bishop, road captain. I want you to know every man here is here because he chose to be here. Nobody was told they had to come. Cole told the story at chapel and we took a vote, and it was 340-0. He paused. That doesn't happen very often. She looked at this man. Why, she said. Not challenging, just genuinely asking. Bishop looked at her steadily. Because most people, when they see someone in trouble, they calculate the cost. You didn't calculate, you just helped. He shrugged a big-shouldered shrug that was somehow both casual and sincere. That's rarer than people think it is. He nodded once and went back to the organized work of the street, directing 2 men with a box to a specific spot with the authority of someone who does logistics in his sleep. Cole put his hand briefly on her arm, not holding just a moment of contact, the kind that says I'm here without making it a bigger thing than it is. Then he moved forward into the organized activity, and she stayed on the sidewalk and watched. She watched 340 men she didn't know unload her survival from the backs of trucks. It took her 10 minutes to stop standing there and start actually looking at what was happening. Her brain needed the 10 minutes. It needed to process the scale of it before it could engage with the specifics. When she could finally move, she walked to the folding table with the produce first. There were more vegetables than she could immediately inventory heads of cabbage bags of carrots, potatoes, by the pound onions, tomatoes, despite the seasoned packages of frozen spinach alongside the fresh things. A man she didn't know looked up when she approached and gave her a brief nod that was both respectful and completely unsentimental. "Where do you want this?" he asked. "Just that." She looked at the table. Where is this supposed to go?" "Your place," he said, "all of it. That's the plan. We've got guys ready to carry it up whenever you say." She turned around and found Cole nearby. "All of this goes in my apartment." "Most of it," he said. "Some of it won't fit. We're making arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" "There's a storage unit 2 blocks from here," he said. "Paid for 6 months for what doesn't fit upstairs." She stared at him. "A storage unit. 6 months. Cole." 340 men, he said quietly. Each one put in what he could, some more, some less. Together it adds up to more than you're going to be comfortable accepting. "I'm already not comfortable." "I know." He looked at her directly. "Accept it anyway." She wanted to argue. The instinct was right there. The same instinct that had fired when he offered the job lead, that fired when Trick showed up with chili, that fired at the note, at everything that had been given or offered. The deep-wired reflex of a woman who had survived by never needing anything from anyone. She stood on her sidewalk, her street, her city, her ordinary life surrounded by 340 men in leather vests who had come here on a Saturday morning because a vote was taken and the vote was unanimous. And in their world, that meant something that didn't have an expiration date. She thought about what Bria had said. Maybe it's that someone is helping you, and you're so unused to that you're trying to find the problem with it before you let yourself accept it. She closed her mouth. She breathed. "Okay," she said. Cole nodded once. "Okay. But I want to help carry things up," she said. "I'm not standing here watching." Something moved in Cole's face. Approval maybe, or recognition, the look of a man seeing something confirmed that he'd already suspected was true. "Nobody's going to stop you," he said. She took her coat off and handed it to nobody in particular. A man materialized and held it without being asked, which was its own kind of overwhelming, and she picked up a bunch of canned goods and carried it through her building's front door. For the next 2 hours, her apartment transformed. She carried boxes. She directed traffic where things went, what belonged in the kitchen versus what needed to go to the storage unit. Men who were twice her size and 3 times her age followed her directions without comment and without condescension, which was not something she had experienced in a professional context very often. They just did what she said and went back for more. Her kitchen filled, her small cabinet space filled. She had to make decisions about organization she'd never had to make before, the particular problem of having more than you have room for, which she'd heard about as a problem, but had never personally experienced. A woman appeared at some point in the second hour, 50s, dark-haired, with an expression that moved easily between businesslike and warm. She came through the front door carrying 2 large foil pans stacked in her arms, and she smiled at Jasmine with the immediate recognition of someone who already knows who you are. "You must be Jasmine," she said. "I'm Ruth." Jasmine stopped moving. "Cole's sister." "The same." Ruth set the foil pans on the kitchen counter and looked around the increasingly organized space with the quick, assessing eye of someone who makes order out of things for a living. "I made 2 lasagnas and a pot of soup. The soup's in the truck. I'll get somebody to bring it up." "You made, Jasmine looked at the foil pans. "Ruth, you didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to," Ruth said pleasantly. "I wanted to. Cole told me about you, and I wanted to feed you, so I did. That's all it is." She said it with such uncomplicated cheerfulness that there was no available surface to push back against. Jasmine looked at this woman, at her no-nonsense posture and her easy smile and the particular warmth of someone who fed people because it was simply how they expressed caring for the world, and felt something in her throat close briefly before she controlled it. "The chili was incredible," Jasmine managed. Ruth beamed. "I'll write you the recipe. It's my grandmother's. She made it every winter for 40 years. She patted Jasmine's arm once naturally, the way women do when they're establishing that they're going to be in each other's lives. Now let me get someone to bring the soup up, and then you can tell me where you want the lasagna, Jasmine told her. Ruth organized. 2 men brought the soup. Ruth directed them with the authority of a woman who had been directing men her entire life and considered it simply the natural order of things. At some point, Jasmine realized she was smiling. Not performing a smile, actually smiling, the kind that happens in the muscles before the conscious mind catches up with it. At noon, Bishop knocked on her open apartment door. He had an envelope in his hand. She looked at it. More, she said. Different, he said. He handed it to her. She opened it. Inside was a card, not fancy, just a plain card, the kind you'd find in any grocery store, and inside the card, in different handwriting, from different pens, in different sizes, were messages. Dozens of them cramped and overlapping in some places, filling every available surface of the inside of the card. She read a few at random. You did right by our brother. We don't forget that. My old lady told me to say thank you from her too. Women like you are why the world still works. Cole's a good man. You're a good woman. Those 2 things don't always find each other. Glad they did. She stopped reading. Not because she wanted to stop, but because her vision was doing something she wasn't going to be able to control in a hallway full of people. 340 signatures, Bishop said quietly. Every man in the chapter. Took us 3 meetings to get them all on there. She nodded. She closed the card carefully and held it in both hands. She didn't speak for a moment because she couldn't, and Bishop seemed to understand this and simply waited in the unhurried way of a man who has seen a lot of things in his life and knows when a moment needs to breathe. Tell them, she started. Stopped. Tell them all. They know, Bishop said. She nodded again. He went back downstairs. She stood in her kitchen, her full kitchen, her organized kitchen, her kitchen that now had more food in it than it had ever held in the 2.5 years she'd lived here, and held the card and looked at the ceiling for about 15 seconds. Then she went back to work. By 1 p.m, the trucks were empty. The street was returning to itself, the men remounting the engines, beginning to restart one by one, the particular thunder of it building again, from silence into something massive. She stood at her door and watched it happen. Cole came up the stairs for the last time and stood in her doorway. He'd worked alongside the other men the whole morning, carrying boxes, directing traffic, lifting things without being asked. She'd noticed this. He hadn't stood apart and supervised. He'd worked. We're getting ready to go, he said. She looked at him. She'd been composing a speech in the back of her mind all morning, a proper thank you, something that covered everything, something adequate to the scale of what had happened. She'd discarded version after version because none of them were right. She gave up on the speech. I don't know what to say, she said, honestly, plainly. You don't have to say anything, he said. I want to. Then say what's true, he said. She thought about it for one moment. I've been alone in this city for a long time, she said. Not alone like no friends, alone like invisible, like the kind of person the city doesn't notice when things go wrong for them. I've been managing, I've been surviving, but I've been doing it without anybody watching. She paused. And then I spent $8 on a stranger's arm, she said. And 340 people showed up to my street on a Saturday morning. And I can't make that make sense, but I feel it. I feel the weight of it, and I'm not going to pretend I don't. Cole was quiet for a moment. His pale eyes were steady on her face. You've been invisible to the wrong people, he said. That's all it is. The right people see you just fine. It was the most personal thing he'd said to her. Not more personal than the facts he'd disclosed the wife, the 12 years, the cancer, but more directed. More pointed toward her specifically. She didn't look away. Come down, he said. They want to see you before they go. She followed him downstairs. She came out onto the sidewalk, and 340 men were mounted, and the engines were going, and the sound of it was enormous and physical, and it pressed on her chest like something with weight. Bishop from the front of the formation raised one fist. Not a wave, a salute. 340 fists went up at the same moment. The sound it made, all those engines at once rising together, was not something she would ever be able to adequately describe to anyone who hadn't felt it. It wasn't just loud, it was dimensional. It filled the air completely from the ground up, and it went through her rather than around her, and it lasted about 10 seconds, and in those 10 seconds she stood on the sidewalk of the city, Nobody remembered with her hands at her sides and her eyes open and felt for the first time in longer than she could accurately measure seen. Completely, entirely, undeniably seen. Then Bishop lowered his fist, and the formation began to move. They came past her one by one, hundreds of men in leather riding past her 3 feet away, close enough that she could see faces. Some of them nodded, some of them raised a hand. One older man with white hair and a long beard caught her eye and gave her something that was too personal to be a wave, more like an acknowledgement, like one survivor recognizing another. Cole was last. He pulled up alongside where she was standing, and the engine dropped to an idle, and he looked at her. "Monday morning," he said. "Bergman and Logistics. Don't be late." "I've never been late a day in my life," she said. "I know," he said. And then without ceremony or elaboration, Cole Maddox rode to join his brothers. She stood on the sidewalk and watched 340 motorcycles round the corner at the end of the block and disappear. The street went quiet. Or rather, the street went back to its ordinary sounds traffic elsewhere. A television from an open window which, after what had just been happening, felt like profound silence. Her neighbor, Mrs. Elaine, appeared beside her on the sidewalk. Mrs. Elaine was 73 and had lived in the building for 22 years and had seen many things and was not easily rattled. "Jasmine," Mrs. Elaine said. "Were those?" "Yes," Jasmine said. "All of them. 340. Mrs. Elaine was quiet for a moment, looking at the empty corner where the last motorcycles had vanished. "What on earth did you do?" she asked. Jasmine thought about a convenience store at 2:14 in the morning. She thought about $8.63. She thought about a man bleeding and a clerk hiding behind policy, and her own exhaustion reaching a point where doing the decent thing was easier than watching the indecent thing continue. "I spent $8, she said. "That's all." Mrs. Elaine looked at her with the expression of someone who has lived long enough to know that the simplest explanations are very rarely the whole story. "Well," she said finally, "you must have spent it very well." Jasmine looked at the empty corner one more time. The street was back to itself. Ordinary, unremarkable, the city nobody remembered doing what it always did. But something about it looked different to her now. Not the street itself, not the buildings or the pavement or the gray February sky. Something in how she was standing on it. She went back upstairs. Her apartment was full of food. The card with 340 signatures was on the kitchen table. The 2 lasagnas Ruth had brought were in the refrigerator. The soup was in a pot on the stove. The storage unit 2 blocks away held 6 months' worth of overflow. She stood in the kitchen and looked at all of it. Then she picked up her phone and called Bria. Bria answered immediately. "I have been watching from my car for the past 2 hours. Bria said without any preamble. "I saw the whole thing. I drove over when you texted me, but I couldn't, Jasmine. I couldn't even park because there were motorcycles everywhere. I was parked on 5th. I watched from the corner." "You were there." "I couldn't not be there. You texted me that something was happening and I..." "Jasmine, 340 motorcycles. On your street." "Jasmine, I know. Are you okay?" She thought about it genuinely, the way Cole had taught her to, not the reflexive, "I'm fine," but the actual question taken seriously. "Yes," she said. "I think I actually am." Bria exhaled. "I'm coming over." "You don't have to. There is lasagna in your fridge and I have not eaten since 7 this morning and I am coming over." A pause. "Also, I need to see this with my own eyes, all of it. I need to stand in your kitchen and see it." Jasmine laughed, real and unguarded, the kind Cole had commented on. "Come over," she said. "Ruth made soup too." "Who is Ruth?" "Cole's sister. She cooks when people are going through things." Bria stopped. "I have so many questions." "I know. Come over. I'll explain everything." She put the phone down and stood in her kitchen and listened to the ordinary sounds of her building, the hallway, Mrs. Elaine moving around downstairs, something from the unit above that was probably a television. Ordinary, normal, the building doing what the building did. But her kitchen was full, and there was a card on the table with 340 signatures in different handwriting. And she had a job starting Monday, and a storage unit 2 blocks away. And a man named Cole Maddox who had told her she'd been invisible to the wrong people. Outside on her street, the last traces of that impossible Saturday morning were already fading, tire marks maybe, and the lingering ghost of engine sound that might just be in her head. The city was reclaiming it the way cities reclaim everything, absorbing the extraordinary back into the ordinary without ceremony. But she had been there. She had stood on that sidewalk and felt 340 engines rise together and felt the specific, irreversible weight of being seen by people who meant it, and that was not something the city could absorb back. That lived in her now. That was hers. She began heating Ruth's soup. Bria arrived 17 minutes later and stood in the kitchen doorway with her coat still on, turning slowly, taking in the full inventory of the space, and when she turned back to Jasmine, her eyes were bright. $8, Bria said. $8, Jasmine confirmed. Bria shook her head slowly. You are the strangest, most extraordinary person I have ever known. Jasmine handed her a bowl of soup. Sit down, she said. I'll tell you everything. Bria stayed until 9 that night. They ate Ruth's soup standing at the kitchen counter at first because sitting down felt too formal for what they were doing, which was less eating and more processing. Jasmine told her everything, the whole sequence from the beginning. The store, the blood, the $8, the note, the phone calls, trick at the door, the chili, Gary Ostrowski, and the job interview. The text that said soon, Saturday morning and the building shaking, and Cole in her hallway with his pale eyes and his bandaged arm, and the particular weight of a man who had done exactly what he said he was going to do. Bria listened. The way Bria listened when something was serious without interrupting, without the reflexive responses people use to fill silences. She just listened and ate soup and let Jasmine tell it in the right order. When Jasmine finished, Bria put her bowl down on the counter and was quiet for a moment. What are you going to do? She asked. What do you mean about Cole? Jasmine looked at her. What about Cole? Bria gave her the look, the particular look that meant Jasmine was being deliberately obtuse, and Bria was not going to pretend she didn't notice. Jasmine, the man called you every night for 2 weeks. He came to your door personally. He was the last one to leave. He told you you'd been invisible to the wrong people. She paused. That's not how men behave when they're settling a debt. You don't know that. I know enough, Bria said, which was almost exactly what Cole had said to Jasmine about herself, and the echo of it sat strangely in the air. He lost his wife 12 years ago, Jasmine said. I think that's exactly why, Bria said gently. Jasmine didn't have a response for that. She picked up her bowl and finished her soup and thought about Cole riding away at the back of his formation and the particular unhurriedness with which he'd looked at her before he went. I don't know what it is, Jasmine said finally, and I'm not going to decide what it is before I know. That, Bria said, is the most sensible thing you've said all day. They ate lasagna after the soup because Ruth had made 2, and they were both there, and the evening had taken on the quality of a celebration, whether either of them had formally declared it one. They sat at the kitchen table with the card open between them, and Bria read messages from it out loud, not all of them, just the ones that caught her eye, and Jasmine listened and occasionally had to look at the ceiling again. After Bria left, Jasmine sat alone at the table for a long time. The apartment was quiet and full in a way it had never been. The food, the card Ruth's pan still on the counter, all of it present, all of it real, all of it requiring her to acknowledge that her situation had changed in ways she hadn't chosen and couldn't fully account for. She thought about what Bishop had said. Most people calculate the cost. You didn't calculate. She'd never thought of it that way. She had not calculated because she was brave or generous. She'd not calculated because she was tired and the situation in front of her was wrong, and she didn't have the energy that night to do anything except react to what was wrong. Her instincts had spent $8 because her brain was too exhausted to argue. And yet here she was, on the other side of it. She went to bed at 10:30 and slept 9 hours straight, which was something her body apparently decided she'd earned. Sunday she called her mother. This required some preparation. Her mother, Diane Carter, lived 40 minutes outside the city in a small house she'd owned in for 30 years and would own until she died, which she frequently said she intended to do in that house and not anywhere else. Diane was 61, retired from a school cafeteria job she'd worked for 24 years, and had the specific brand of love for her daughter that expressed itself primarily through worry and unsolicited practical advice. They talked every 2 weeks, usually briefly, usually with Jasmine filtering the news of her life through the particular sieve she kept for her mother, letting through the manageable things, holding back the alarming things, presenting an edited version of her own life that was technically true but strategically incomplete. Today she didn't filter. She told her mother everything. She heard her mother's breathing change about 45 seconds in the small caught breath of a woman whose protective instincts had activated, and she talked through it because stopping would only make it worse. When she finished, Diane was quiet for 3 full seconds, which was a long time for Diane. Hell's Angels, Diane said. Yes. Real ones. Yes, Mama. On your street. 340 of them. Another silence. Jasmine could hear her mother processing the particular quality of a woman who wants to say 12 things at once and is choosing which one to lead with. Are you safe? Diane said. Yes. This man, Cole, it's not like that, Mama. I didn't say it was like anything. I asked if you're safe. I'm safe. I'm more than safe. I have more food than I can fit in my apartment and a job starting Monday and a job. Diane's voice shifted. You got a job. Monday morning. Bergman Logistics. Better pay, better hours. Jasmine. Her mother's voice had that particular combination of relief and something close to tears that Diane Carter would never fully let become actual tears. Why didn't you tell me about the layoff? Because I was handling it. You're always handling it. You can let someone know when you're handling it. You can let your mother know. I know, I should have. I'm telling you now. A pause, then quietly. You spent your last $8 on a stranger. I had 85 cents left. Jasmine Marie Carter. It's fine, Mama. It turned out to be fine. That's not. Diane stopped. Started again. What kind of man is he? This Cole. Jasmine thought about how to answer that honestly. Quiet, she said. He doesn't talk unless he has something to say. He does what he says he's going to do. He's been through things. She paused. He lost his wife. He's been running that club for a long time. He has a sister named Ruth who makes chili and lasagna for people she's never met. Diane was quiet for a moment. He sounds like someone who knows what loss is. I think he does. Those are sometimes the most reliable people, Diane said. The ones who've been broken and kept going anyway. They understand what it costs. Jasmine sat with that for a moment. Come see me Wednesday, Diane said. It wasn't a request. I have orientation Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday evening, I'll make dinner. You can tell me everything again properly sitting at my kitchen table where I can see your face and know you're actually all right. I'm actually all right, Mama. I'll decide that when I see you, Diane said with the absolute certainty of a woman who has been reading her daughter's face for 26 years and trusts her own read over Jasmine's self-report every time. Jasmine went Wednesday. That part mattered, but it would come later. Monday morning, she was at Bergman Logistics at 8:45, 15 minutes early. She wore the same clothes she'd worn to the interview because they'd worked once, and she believed in not changing what worked. Gary Ostrowski met her in the lobby and walked her through orientation personally, which she suspected was not standard, but which she didn't comment on. The facility was twice the size of Harmon Distribution. Better equipment, better lighting, better everything. The people she met during the morning walkthrough were professional and direct, and no one made her feel like the new person in the way that sometimes happened, the way where new meant provisional and unproven. She was introduced and people shook her hand and went back to their work, which was the best possible reception. At lunch, she sat in the break room with her peanut butter sandwich. She was still in the habit of packing lunch, which was a habit she intended to keep because packing lunch was how you kept $20 in your pocket at the end of the week, and her phone buzzed. Cole. Just 3 words. First day good. She typed back, really good. Thank you for Gary. His response came fast. Gary did his own deciding. You did the interview. She smiled at her phone and put it away and finished her sandwich. Her supervisor, a compact businesslike woman named Teresa, who had 20 years at Bergman and made no secret of high standards, assigned her to the inventory coordination team for the first week, which was both more complex and more interesting than what she'd done at Harmon. By 3 in the afternoon, she'd made 2 process suggestions that Teresa had written down without comment, which Jasmine understood to mean the suggestions were being taken seriously. She took the bus home. She had $62 in her account and a first paycheck coming Friday, and a kitchen full of food, and a storage unit 2 blocks away. And she sat on the bus in the late afternoon and thought about the distance between last Tuesday and this one. 7 days. It was not possible that 7 days contained everything that had happened, and yet the math was clear. She called Bria on the walk home from the bus stop. "First day," Bria asked immediately. "Really good. Teresa." "You know about Teresa?" "My cousin worked at Bergman 2 years ago. How'd she seem?" "Exacting," Jasmine said. "I like exacting. Exacting means she knows what good work looks like." Bria laughed. "Only you would be happy about a demanding supervisor." "I'm good at my job," Jasmine said simply. "I'd rather work for someone who can tell." She heated soup for dinner and read and went to bed at a reasonable hour and felt steadily, quietly without drama, like a person whose feet were underneath her. Tuesday evening, she got a call she wasn't expecting. Not Cole, not Trick, not Bria. It was a number she didn't recognize local, and she answered it with the careful readiness she kept for unknown numbers. "Ms. Carter," a woman's voice, professional, older. "My name is Carol Hennessy. I'm calling from the Millard Street Community Church." Jasmine's first thought was that she'd forgotten to return something to them, a form of food pantry bag, something from the one time she'd been there. "Yes," she said. "We heard about what happened on Saturday," Carol said. "On your street, the motorcycles." Jasmine waited. "The whole neighborhood's been talking about it," Carol said, and her voice had a quality in it that Jasmine couldn't immediately categorize, part wonder, part something more careful. "We have a woman in our congregation, Shirley. She lives 2 buildings down from you. She said she's never seen anything like it in 40 years in this neighborhood." "It was something," Jasmine said carefully. "Miss Carter, I'm calling because I want to ask you something, and I want to be clear that there's absolutely no obligation. We do a community testimony series every third Sunday, people from the neighborhood who have a story to share, something that's happened to them, something that might resonate with people who are struggling." A pause. "I heard about what you did, what you started, I suppose, and I think a lot of people in that church would benefit from hearing it." Jasmine stood in her kitchen and looked at the full shelves and thought about standing on her sidewalk watching 340 fists go up at the same moment. I'm not a speaker," she said. "You don't have to be a speaker," Carol said gently. "You just have to tell the truth. That's all we ever ask." She said she'd think about it. She took Carol's number. She hung up and stood at the window for a while, and then she called Cole. "A church wants me to speak," she said when he answered. A pause. "Which church?" "Millard Street. Community church. Third Sunday testimony thing." "Carol Hennessy," he said. She stopped. "You know her." "We've had dealings," he said. "Not complicated ones. She's a good woman. Runs a solid program." He paused. "What did you tell her?" "That I'd think about it." "What are you thinking?" She turned it over. "I'm thinking, who am I to stand up in front of people and tell this story? This story happened to me because of you and your club. I didn't do anything remarkable. I was tired and I paid for gauze, and then a series of remarkable things happened around me." "That's not how the story goes," Cole said. "It's literally what happened." "It's the facts," he said. "It's not the story. The story is that you made a choice when you didn't have to, and when it cost you something real. The story is that a woman with 85 cents left to her name didn't walk past a person in trouble." He paused. "That's the story Carol Hennessy wants to tell her congregation. Because half the people in that room are 3 days from a crisis, and they need to hear that doing the right thing can come back around." She was quiet. "You don't have to do it," he said, "but you should do it." "Those are different things." "Yes," he said. "They usually are." She called Carol back the next morning and said yes. Wednesday evening, she drove to her mother's house. She'd borrowed Bria's car, a civic gesture that Bria had insisted on with the kind of cheerful bossiness that was one of the things Jasmine valued most about her. Diane Carter opened the door before Jasmine had finished climbing the porch steps, which meant she'd been watching for the car, which Jasmine had expected. Her mother looked her over the way mothers do, quickly, completely, from face to posture to the quality of her daughter's eyes, and whatever she was checking for, she seemed to find enough of it in the right condition, because she stepped back and said, "Come in, dinner's ready," with only a small, extra tightness around her mouth that meant the relief was real, even if she wasn't going to perform it. Diane had made pot roast, not because it was a special occasion, but because pot roast was what you made for a daughter who'd been surviving on rice and beans and convenience store crackers and had just been through the strangest 2.5 weeks of her adult life. Jasmine sat at the kitchen table she'd sat at for the first 18 years of her life and ate pot roast and felt the specific comfort of a place that had never required her to perform okayness. "Tell me again," Diane said. "From the beginning. I want to hear it right." So Jasmine told it again. The same story told differently, this time slower, with more of the interior of it. What she'd felt standing at that counter. What the 85 cents had felt like in her hand. What Cole's voice sounded like on the phone. What it was to hear an engine sound and look out the window and keep counting past 100. Diane listened without interrupting. She ate her dinner. She refilled Jasmine's water glass once without being asked. When Jasmine finished, Diane was quiet for a long moment. "Your father would have done the same thing," she said. "The $8, he would have paid it." Jasmine's father had died when she was 11. She thought about him rarely in a way she could control, but when he came up, especially when he came up like this as a comparison, as a measuring stick, she felt it all the way down. "You think so?" she said. "I know so," Diane said. "He had the same thing you have. That thing where the cost doesn't stop you when something's wrong right in front of you." She looked at her daughter steadily. "I used to worry about it when you were little. I thought it was going to get you hurt." And now, Diane's mouth did something complicated. "And now 340 men showed up to your street," she said. "So maybe your father was onto something." They did the dishes together after dinner, Jasmine washing, Diane drying, the rhythm of it as automatic as breathing. Jasmine had done dishes in this kitchen 10,000 times. Her hands knew exactly where the sponge was, exactly the right angle for the faucet. "This Cole," Diane said, drying a glass. "Mama, I'm not making an assumption. I'm asking a question." Jasmine handed her a plate. "Ask it. Does he make you feel safe?" She thought about it seriously. Not the surface answer, not the "Cole doesn't threaten me" answer, but the real one, the one that required her to actually measure something internal. "Yes," she said. "In a way I didn't know I'd been missing." Diane dried the plate, put it in the cabinet, reached for the next one. "Then pay attention to that," she said. Simply, finally. They didn't discuss it further. They never needed to. Jasmine drove Bria's car back to the city that night and let herself into her apartment and stood in her kitchen for a moment before she turned on the light. The darkness of the room, the smell of it, the soup, the lasagna's lingering warmth, the particular smell of a space that had food in it was different from the darkness it had been 2 weeks ago. Not literally. The room was the same room, but it held different things now. She turned the light on. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table with the card in front of her, 340 signatures, and read through more of it than she had before. Some of them were funny. Some of them were very short, just a name and a patch, nothing else, which she'd come to understand meant something specific in their world. Some of them were longer than they probably needed to be, clearly written by men who didn't write much and were working hard to say the right thing. One of them near the back in handwriting that she recognized as older. The particular, slightly unsteady, careful print of a man in his 70s who still had all his coordination, but whose hands had been hard used for 50 years, said, "My wife passed 3 years ago. I know what alone looks like when it's wearing a brave face. You wear it well, young lady. You deserve to take it off sometimes." Harlan. She read it twice. Then she closed the card and left it on the table and went to bed. She didn't take the feeling apart. She just let it exist. Thursday, her second week at Bergman, Teresa stopped by her workstation. "Those 2 process notes you gave me Monday," she said. Jasmine looked up. "Yes. I ran them by Gary. We're implementing them both next quarter, starting with the inventory flag system." She said it with the brisk neutrality of someone delivering information, not a compliment. Then she started to walk away and stopped. "Good eye," she said without turning around, and kept walking. Jasmine sat at her workstation and felt something warm and specific move through her chest. Not pride exactly, though it was related to pride. More the particular satisfaction of being seen by someone who understood what they were looking at. She texted Cole at lunch, "Teresa's implementing my process notes." His response, "Of course she is." She laughed out loud in the Bergman break room, and the man across the table looked at her and she shook her head and he went back to his sandwich. Friday afternoon, she got a call from Trick. "There's something Cole wants to discuss with you," Trick said. "In person. He's asking if Saturday morning works." Saturday morning. The words had a specific association now. They always would, she suspected. What kind of something? She asked. I'm going to let him explain it, Trick said. But I want you to know it's a good something. Not an ask, more of an offer. Does he do a lot of offering? A pause and she could almost hear Trick calibrating something. No, he said. He doesn't. She said Saturday morning was fine. She gave no more thought to what it might be, or rather she gave it a great deal of thought and reached no conclusions, which was what happened when you tried to predict Cole Maddox. Saturday morning he knocked on her door at 10. She'd been up since 8, which was not because she was nervous. She told herself this, but because Saturday had become the kind of morning she woke up early on now without understanding why. She opened the door. He was in the same vest, same gray hair, same pale eyes. But there was something different in his posture today, less of the managed containment she'd gotten used to. He stood in her doorway with a quality that was slightly more open than usual, the way someone stands when they've decided to say something they've been thinking about for a while and have now committed to saying it. Come in, she said. He came in, she made coffee, she'd started assuming he wanted coffee, and he'd never corrected the assumption, and they sat at the kitchen table, the card still in its usual spot, and she waited. Cole looked at the card for a moment, then at her. You know what my club does, he said, not a question. I know the general outline. I'm not going to give you the full picture, he said, because the full picture is complicated and some of it isn't mine to share. But I want to tell you something specific. He wrapped both hands around his mug. The chapter has a fund, has for 15 years. It started because one of our brothers lost his house in a fire and we passed the hat and it turned into a practice. We call it the Balance Fund. When someone in the club's circle family associates people who've done right by us is in a situation, we use the fund. She was listening carefully. What I want to offer you, he said, is not money from the fund. It's something different. He looked at her directly. I want to offer you a connection. A connection. There are 3 businesses in this city that the chapter has a relationship with. Small places, owner-operated, good people who've been in tight spots before and understand what it is to need a hand up instead of a hand out. He paused. One of them is a bookkeeper who works out of her house. She's been helping our members with taxes and finances for 8 years. She told me last month she's looking for an apprentice, someone to train up so she can eventually retire without the business dying. Jasmine looked at him. I'm not an accountant. You're taking a computer skills course, he said. You made 2 process improvements in your first week at a new job. You managed your own finances through 2 years of near poverty without going under. He met her eyes. You're not an accountant yet. Carla, the bookkeeper, she's not looking for someone who already knows. She's looking for someone she can trust to learn. The offer landed in the space between them, and Jasmine felt the shape of it. Not just what it was, another door, but what it represented. Cole wasn't offering her rescue. He was offering her trajectory. There was a fundamental difference between a thing that kept you where you were more comfortably and a thing that moved you somewhere new. You've thought about this, she said. I've thought about it since before Saturday, he said. I wanted to wait until you'd started at Bergman, until you had your feet. Why? He looked at her steadily. Because I didn't want you to feel like you were accepting help because you had no other choice. I wanted you to have a choice first, and then I wanted to show you another one. She sat with that. The deliberateness of it, the particular wire of a man who had thought not just about what would help, but about how help could be offered without removing the agency of the person receiving it. You've done this before, she said, thought through how people need things. I've been running a club for 18 years, he said. You learn pretty quickly that what people need and what people can accept aren't always the same thing. If you give someone help in a way that makes them feel small, you haven't helped them. You've just made yourself feel useful. She looked at him. This man who ran an organization that the world called dangerous, who spoke like someone who had read more about human dignity than most people with graduate degrees, who brought food to her building in truck beds and signed a card with his name and showed up on her doorstep with another door to open. Tell me about Carla, she said. Cole's posture shifted just slightly, just that small settling she'd noticed before when she moved towards something instead of away from it. She's 63, he said. She grew up 2 miles from here. She started bookkeeping because she needed a skill, and she learned it out of library books, which is why she doesn't care about formal credentials. She does the accounts for 11 small businesses in the city, and she keeps every one of them honest and out of trouble. He paused. She's also one of the bluntest people I've ever known, which I mention as a warning. I can handle blunt. I thought you might say that, he said. She met Carla the following Wednesday. Ruth came too, not as an intermediary, but because Ruth went everywhere that involved a meal, and she'd made a chicken casserole for the occasion, which Carla accepted with the complete unsurprise of someone who had been receiving Ruth's food for years. Carla was exactly as Cole had described, 63 blunt, the kind of sharp-eyed, quick-speaking person who processes information faster than most people and has long since stopped pretending to go slower for company. She asked Jasmine questions for 40 minutes without pausing. Not interview questions, real ones. What do you do when you make a mistake? How do you tell someone their numbers don't add up? Have you ever had to tell someone something they didn't want to hear? And how did you say it? Jasmine answered everything straight. No polish, no performance. The real answer's the way Cole had told her to do with Gary. Carla listened, made notes on a legal pad in handwriting that moved faster than seemed possible. At the end of 40 minutes, she put the pen down. You can start learning from me on Saturdays, she said. No pay yet. I'm not paying you to learn. When you can do the work, we talk about what that's worth. If you can't do the work, we stop. She looked at Jasmine without any particular warmth or coldness, just clarity. I don't coddle and I don't praise unless something deserves it. You'll know when something deserves it because I'll say so. That's fine, Jasmine said. It won't feel fine the first time I tell you something's wrong, Carla said. Then I'll fix it, Jasmine said. Carla looked at her for a moment. Then she picked up her pen. Saturday at 9, she said. Don't be late. On the drive back, Ruth reached over from the passenger seat and patted Jasmine's hand once. She liked you, Ruth said. She didn't show it. No, Ruth said. She showed it by saying Saturday. Carla has turned down 14 people in 3 years. The last 2 she didn't even let finish the first question. She glanced at Jasmine. She said Saturday. That's the highest compliment Carla knows how to give. Jasmine drove and thought about that. That night, she called Cole. Carla said Saturday, she told him. I know, she called me. You two talk a lot. She's been keeping my books for 11 years, he said. She calls me when something matters. You matter, Ed, to her, Jasmine said, with just enough edge that it almost became a joke. You matter, Ed, to her, Cole said, and then quietly, which isn't surprising. She let that sit. She'd gotten better at letting his particular comments sit without immediately deflecting them. She'd had practice. Cole, she said. Jasmine, I want to ask you something and I want you to give me a straight answer. A pause. Okay? All of this, the job lead, Carla, Saturday morning, is this the debt being paid? Is this it being finished? Because I want to know if there's an end to it. I want to know where the boundary is. Silence. Longer than his usual silences. She waited. The debt, he said finally, was paid on the day 340 men came to your street. That was the chapter settling what you did for me. That was finished. He paused. Everything since then is not the debt. She went very still. What is it, she asked. Carefully, honestly. Cole was quiet again, and this quiet had a different texture. Not the thinking quiet, but something more deliberate. It's me deciding I want to know you, he said. That's all. That's the whole of it. Not obligation, not honor, not the club. Another pause. Just me, deciding. She sat at her kitchen table with the phone against her ear and the card with 340 names in front of her and the sound of his voice settling into the room like something that had been traveling for a while and had finally arrived. She thought about what Bria had said and what her mother had said and what Harlan had written in his careful older man's hand. Okay, she said. A pause. Okay. Come for dinner Saturday, she said. After Carla, I'll cook. She heard something change in the quality of his silence, not quite a sound, but the absence of a particular tension she'd been hearing underneath every conversation without knowing it was there until it was gone. I'll bring Ruth, he said. Don't bring Ruth, she said. Ruth will cook, and then it won't be me cooking. A pause, and then clean and real and unhurried, she heard Cole Maddox laugh. Not a big laugh, just a brief, genuine surprise sound that clearly didn't happen very often and was all the more real for that. Fair, he said. Just me. Just you, she said. She hung up and sat at the table and felt the particular quality of a moment that had shifted something permanently. Not dramatically, not all at once, just a quiet, irrevocable movement, like a door that opens on good hinges. No fanfare, just a smooth swing from closed to open and the air from the other side coming through. She opened her laptop. She pulled up the community testimony form for Millard Street Church. She filled it out and submitted it before she could argue herself out of it. Her story, third Sunday. She would tell it to people who were 3 days from a crisis and needed to know that decent things could come back around. She would tell it straight. No polish. The real answer. She closed the laptop and looked at the full kitchen around her, the shelves, the refrigerator, the organized cabinet space she'd had to learn how to manage because she'd never needed this much room before. She thought about this version of herself who had stood in Quickmart 3 weeks ago with $8.63 and a February wind waiting for her outside, and a 3-mile walk and no particular reason to believe Saturday mornings could contain anything other than cleaning and hunger, and the patient management of not having enough. That woman had made one decision, one exhausted, irritated, instinctive decision, and here was what the other side of it looked like. Not magic, not a fairy tale, not a transformation that erased everything hard about her life. She still had debt. She still took the bus. She still had months of learning ahead of her before Carla would consider paying her for anything. She still lived in a city nobody remembered, in an apartment that was small and managed. But she had feet underneath her, real ones, the kind you build over time from solid things work that was seen food that was made, a man who called because he wanted to know her and said so directly, a woman who would teach her something real on Saturday mornings and not pretend the learning was easy. She was not just surviving anymore. She wasn't entirely sure yet what she was instead, but she was starting to find out. The first Saturday with Carla nearly broke her. Not because Carla was cruel. She wasn't. But she was exactly what she'd promised to be, precise, unsparing, and completely without the cushioning that most people instinctively wrapped around corrections when they were trying to be kind. Carla didn't wrap anything. She handed you the thing directly and waited for you to decide what to do with it. Jasmine arrived at 9 exactly. Not 8:59, not 9:01, 9. She'd given herself 40 minutes of buffer and stood outside on the sidewalk for 3 of them, because showing up before you're expected is its own kind of presumption, and she understood that about Carla already. The first hour was financial vocabulary. Carla talked and Jasmine took notes in the small notebook she'd brought, the same one she'd used for Bergman logistics research, and she wrote fast because Carla talked fast and didn't offer to repeat things. The second hour was a practice ledger. Carla put a paper in front of her with 8 months of business transactions for a fictional small restaurant and said, "Tell me what's wrong with this." Jasmine looked at it for 20 minutes. She found 3 things. Carla looked at her list, made a small sound that was not a compliment and not an insult, and circled 6 additional errors Jasmine had missed. "You found the obvious ones," Carla said. "The obvious ones are not what's going to sink a business. It's always the ones that look right until they don't." "How do you learn to see those?" "You look at 1,000 ledgers," Carla said. "There's no shortcut. Your eye has to learn the pattern before it can recognize what breaks the pattern." She tapped the paper. "You'll do this exercise again next week with a different set. You'll get more of them." "How many did you get when you first started?" Carla looked at her. 2, she said. "I found 2. I cried in my car afterward." She said it without embarrassment, just as a fact. "And then I went home and I looked at ledgers every night for 2 months until I could find all 9. Jasmine looked at the paper with Carla's 6 red circles. "I'll find all 9 next week," she said. Carla said nothing, but she wrote something on her legal pad and Jasmine suspected it was not a question. She left at noon with a folder of practice materials and a reading list that included 2 textbooks Carla said she could find at the library and 1 PDF she was emailing her that evening. She walked to her car, Bria's car again, borrowed again because Jasmine was already calculating the math on getting her own vehicle back, and it was starting to be possible, which was its own kind of vertigo, and sat for a moment. She hadn't cried. She wasn't going to cry. But she understood now why Carla had cried, because the gap between what you thought you knew and what you actually needed to know was a specific kind of humbling, the kind that only happens when someone respects you enough to show you the full distance rather than a comfortable portion of it. Cole's car was in front of her building when she got home. She hadn't expected him early. It was barely past noon and dinner was a 6 o'clock plan. She sat in the parked car for a moment looking at a dark truck, practical, nothing flashy, and thought about a man who said he'd decided he wanted to know her and apparently meant it in the most literal possible way. She went upstairs. He was in the hallway outside her apartment, not sitting, just standing, because Cole Maddox stood in hallways the way other people sat in waiting rooms, like he had the patience for it and no particular investment in rushing. "You're early," she said. "I brought groceries," he said. He had 2 bags, actual grocery bags. "I thought I'd help cook." She looked at the bags. "Can you cook?" "Some things," he said. "Ruth didn't let me near her kitchen for the first 10 years I lived on my own. That taught me to figure it out." She unlocked the door and let him in, and the particular quality of having Cole Maddox in her apartment, which had happened now several times but still registered as a thing, each time moved through her awareness as she took her coat off. He put the groceries on the counter, and she looked at what he'd brought. Chicken, garlic, lemons, good pasta, not the cheap kind, a bunch of fresh parsley. "Lemon chicken pasta," he said. "It's one of 5 things I actually know how to make." "What are the other 4? "Chili, though not as good as Ruth's, which she never lets me forget. Fried eggs, which doesn't count. A pot roast that takes 6 hours and is only worth making in winter. And a fish stew that I learned from a man in New Orleans in 1987 and have made maybe once a year since." She looked at him. "You've been to New Orleans?" "I've been a lot of places," he said. He started unpacking the bags with the organized efficiency of a man comfortable in kitchens. 30 years on a motorcycle takes you through most of this country, if you let it. "What's the farthest you've been?" "Rode to Alaska in 2003, he said. 6 weeks. Came back through Canada." He paused, setting a lemon on the counter. "After Carol died. That was, I needed to be moving." She heard the shift in his voice on Carol's name. Not breaking Cole didn't break, she was learning, but the quality of the air around the word changed the way a room changes when a window opens. "Tell me about her," Jasmine said, carefully, not prying offering. He was quiet for a moment, working with the chicken. She didn't push. "Carol was loud," he said, "not in a bad way, in the way some people fill a room just by existing in it." She laughed too hard at her own jokes. She was an elementary school teacher for 20 years, and she brought that energy home every night. The talking, the explaining, the way she'd find the lesson in everything. He paused. "When she got sick, she kept teaching, all the way through chemo. She said the kids needed the routine more than she needed to rest." Jasmine listened. "She died on a Thursday in March," he said, "and I left on the bike that Saturday. Trick and Bishop and 2 other brothers came with me. We rode for 6 weeks and nobody talked much, and that was what I needed." "Did it help?" "It helped me understand that she was gone," he said. "Not the same as healing. Just understanding." He looked up from the counter. "Some things you don't heal from. You just learn to carry them right." She thought about that phrase. Carry them right. The particular wisdom of someone who had been carrying something heavy long enough to understand that the weight was permanent, and the only variable was the manner of bearing it. "She would have liked you," Cole said. It landed simply without fanfare or seduction, just a fact he'd decided to share. "How do you know?" she asked. "Because she had no patience for people who flinched from what was real," he said. "You don't flinch." He looked at her directly. She would have respected that. Jasmine held that for a moment, the gift of it being seen through someone else's eyes by someone who loved them. "Thank you for telling me that," she said. "Thank you for asking," he said. They cooked together for an hour and a half, and the conversation moved the way good conversation moves, not in a straight line, but in loops and returns, covering territory and doubling back over it from different angles. He told her about Alaska. She told him about her mother and the pot roast and what it was like growing up in a house where love came wrapped in worry. He told her about joining the club at 22, which he described as the best and the most complicated decision he had ever made, and did not elaborate further, and she didn't ask him to. She told him about the computer skills class and the moment she'd realized she was good at certain kinds of systematic thinking that she'd never had the space or the resources to properly develop. He listened to this the way he listened to everything completely, without filling the pauses. The pasta was good, better than good, actually, the lemon and garlic doing something together that was more than either of them alone. "You can cook," she said. "I said I could." "You said some things?" Lemon chicken pasta is one of my five. He ate without self-consciousness. What do you make well? She thought about it. Rice dishes. I've made rice interesting for 2 years through necessity, which is a real culinary education. She paused. And I make a good pie. Apple. My grandmother's recipe. I haven't had a homemade pie since Carol died, he said. Not dramatically, just honestly. Then I'll make one, she said. Next time. The two words landed in the room and established something. Next time. Both of them understood it. Neither made it larger than it was. After dinner, he helped her wash up, standing beside her at the sink, the way she'd stood beside her mother at her mother's sink. And when the kitchen was clean, he sat at the table with the card in front of him. She had left it there, as always, and he looked at it. You still read it, he said. Sometimes, she said. Harlan's message. He looked up. The one near the back, she said. The older handwriting. He said, I wear a brave face well, and that I deserve to take it off sometimes. Cole found the page. Read it. His expression moved in a way she was getting better at reading, subtle real the small movements of a man who wasn't practiced at showing things on his face but wasn't entirely able to stop them either. Harlan's been in the club 41 years, he said. He lost his wife 3 years ago, 52 years together. He put the card down. He almost didn't come Saturday. He doesn't ride much in winter anymore, his hands. But he came anyway. She looked at Cole. Why? Because he said anyone who made Cole Maddox speak like that in chapel was someone worth showing up for. He met her eyes. Those were his exact words. She didn't ask what Cole had said in chapel. She thought she understood enough of it, and there was something she valued about not knowing everything about some things remaining in their proper space, private between men who had ridden for 40 years together. Tell him I'm glad he came, she said. Tell him yourself, Cole said. The chapter has a dinner next month. Every year in March. Families associates people in the club's circle. He paused. I'd like you to come. She looked at him steadily. As what? He held her gaze. As someone I want there, he said. No categories, no labels. Just the directness of a man who had decided to say the simple, true thing. She nodded. I'll come, she said. No. Third Sunday came 2 weeks later. She stood in the vestibule of Millard Street Community Church in her good clothes. The dark slacks again, a blouse she'd bought at the thrift store specifically for this, something presentable, and waited for Carol Hennessy to come get her. She had not written anything down. Cole had asked if she was preparing notes, and she'd said no. And he'd said good, and she'd asked why. And he'd said because notes make people perform, and performing makes people miss the thing they're actually there to say. She stood and felt her heart doing its complicated thing, and thought about the 100 people on the other side of the door who were struggling with their own versions of near impossible and had come to this church on a Sunday morning because they needed to hear something real. Carol appeared, warm, efficient, the organized energy of a woman who ran things. Ready? Carol asked. No, Jasmine said. Let's go anyway. Carol smiled. My favorite kind of speaker, she said. She walked through the door and up to the small podium and looked out at the room. She'd expected to feel small. She felt something different, a gravity, a weight that wasn't crushing, but grounding. Like the room itself was holding her up from below rather than pressing down from above. She took a breath. I had $8.63, she said. That's where this story starts. The room went completely quiet. She told it straight. No polish, no presentation. She told it the way she'd told it to Bria at the kitchen counter and to her mother at the kitchen table, in order with the interior of it intact. What the 85 cents had felt like. What Cole's note had said. What it was to hear an engine and look out your window and lose count after 100. What Bishop had said about calculating the cost. What Harlan had written. She told them what she'd understood and what she hadn't. She told them the part she hadn't said out loud to anyone yet, that the hardest moment of the whole thing wasn't the layoff or the near-empty account, or even standing on the sidewalk with 340 engines shaking her ribs. The hardest moment was accepting it, all of it, the help and the attention and the being seen after so long of being the person who managed alone and asked for nothing because asking felt like failing, and failing felt like the thing that would finally prove she wasn't going to take it. I almost walked away from it, she said to the room. Every single piece of it. The job lead, the food, the introduction to a woman who's teaching me something real. I almost said no to all of it because I had convinced myself that I didn't need that, I couldn't need that, needing was the same as weakness. She paused. It's not, she said. That's the thing I learned. Needing is not weakness. Needing is just being human in a hard situation. The weakness, if there is one, is in refusing every hand that reaches because you're too proud or too scared or too tired to examine the difference between dependency and just letting someone help you stand up. Silence in the room, the complete stillness of people who are hearing something they recognize. A group of men the world calls dangerous saw my humanity more clearly than most of the institutions that were supposed to help me, she said. That should make us ask some questions about who we call dangerous and who we call safe, about which communities actually show up and which ones talk about showing up, about what it means when someone labeled an outsider is the one standing in your corner when the city has gone quiet. She stopped. She looked at the room. I spent $8, she said, and I got my life back. Not because of magic, not because the world is secretly fair, but because one decent act reached one person who came from a world that takes those things seriously. And that world showed up. She paused for one last beat. So if you're sitting here this morning with $8 and a question about whether any of it matters, I need you to hear me when I say it does. Every single dollar of it, every single act, it matters, even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching. Because somewhere someone is always keeping count. She stepped back from the podium. The room held its quiet for one long moment. Then it broke open. Not applause in the performance sense, more like the sound a room makes when something has been said that people needed to hear, and the release of it is collective and real. People clapping, but also something underneath the clapping, a kind of exhale. Carol was waiting for her at the side of the room with her hand already extended. You said you weren't ready, Carol said. I wasn't, Jasmine said. That's why it worked, Carol said. Yes. In the parking lot after a woman stopped her. 50s brown coat, the look of someone who had gotten up that morning and chosen to come here, but against some internal resistance, and was glad she had. I'm 3 weeks out from a layoff, the woman said. Her voice was steady but working at it. I sat in there and I thought, what if I just did one thing? One decent thing this week. What if I just stopped calculating? Jasmine looked at her. What's your name? Patricia. Patricia, Jasmine said, do the one thing. Patricia nodded, pressed her lips together once, nodded again, and walked to her car. Jasmine stood in the parking lot and watched her go and felt something so specific and so complete that she needed a moment alone with it before she could move. She pulled out her phone, called Cole. He answered on the first ring. How'd it go? She told him about Patricia. He was quiet for a moment. Then that's the whole point, he said. That's exactly the whole point. I know, she said. I understand it now in a way I didn't before I said it out loud. Things work that way sometimes, he said. You explain something and the explanation teaches you. She looked at the parking lot at people getting into their cars at the Sunday morning of a city that was ordinary and struggling and still full of people showing up to hear something real because they needed it. I'm hungry, she said. I was too nervous to eat this morning. Ruth made brunch, he said immediately. She laughed. Of course she did. She's been cooking since 7. She wanted to be ready when you called. She knew I'd call. She knew you'd need food after, he said. Ruth always knows who needs food. I'm starting to think Ruth might be the most perceptive person I've ever met. Don't tell her that, Cole said. She'll be insufferable. She drove to Ruth's house. She knew the address by now, which was its own kind of milestone. And when Ruth opened the door, she didn't say anything about the church or the testimony or any of it. She just looked at Jasmine's face, read whatever she found there, and stepped back. Sit down, Ruth said. I'll make you a plate. March came slowly, and then all at once, the way February always surrendered to it reluctantly, and then the change happened overnight, and you woke up one morning and the air had shifted. Her second paycheck from Bergman had her $40 ahead of her basic expenses for the first time in 2 years. She put $35 of it in savings. Not $11. $35. She sat at the kitchen table after the transfer and looked at the number on her phone screen for a long time. Carla told her on her 4th Saturday that she'd found 7 of the 9 errors on the practice ledger. 7, Carla said, looking at her list. I know I missed 2, Jasmine said. I think I know which ones. Tell me, she told her. She was right about one of them. The other one she'd misidentified. She'd seen the problem but diagnosed it wrong. Close, Carla said. Coming from Carla, close was a standing ovation. I'll get all 9 next week, Jasmine said. You said that last week, Carla said. I know. I was wrong last week. I'll be right this week. Carla wrote on her legal pad. Jasmine was increasingly certain that Carla's legal pad was where the real evaluations happened, the ones that actually determined what she thought of a person, and that what ended up on it was more honest than anything said out loud. She got 8 of 9 the following Saturday. The 9th she found halfway home on the bus and texted Carla a description of it and got a response 4 hours later that said simply correct. She read it 3 times. The chapter dinner was the second Saturday in March. Cole picked her up at 6. He was in a collared shirt, still the vest. She suspected he slept in the vest, but the collared shirt was a gesture, and she recognized it as one. You look nice, he said when she opened the door. You told me it was casual, she said. It is casual. You still look nice. She had bought a new blouse. Not expensive, the thrift store again, but a good find, a deep green that Bria had declared was exactly her color, with the certainty of someone who had opinions about these things and expected them to be followed. She'd also done her hair properly for the first time since the church, and she was not going to acknowledge any connection between those 2 facts. The dinner was at a rented hall 2 miles from the clubhouse. She walked in on Cole's arm, not performed, just practical he'd offered, and she'd taken it, and 340 men and their families were already there. And the noise level was the noise level of a large group of people who had been doing this for years together and were comfortable in the doing of it. She was not invisible for a single second. It wasn't overwhelming the way she'd feared it might be. It was warm. People came to her and introduced themselves and said things that were real. A man named Dougie, who had a laugh that arrived about 3 seconds before he did, told her he'd told his teenage daughter about the $8 story, and his daughter had started volunteering at a food bank the following week. A woman named Pat, not the Pat from her building, a different Pat, it was a common name in this room, told her that she'd been married to her husband for 31 years, and the week before the Saturday dinner, she'd read him the card. Not all of it, just a few of the messages. And he'd been quiet for a long time, and then he'd said, I think that woman is the real thing. He doesn't say that about many people, Pat said. Which one is he? Jasmine asked. Pat pointed. A heavy-set man with a white beard across the room, currently in a very serious conversation about something with Bishop. I'll thank him, Jasmine said. He'll be embarrassed, Pat said happily. Go ahead. She went over and thanked him. He was embarrassed. She liked him immediately. Harlan was there. She found him at a table near the back, nursing a beer, watching the room with the particular quietness of a man who has seen a lot of versions of this room over 41 years and is still finding things to notice. He was older than she'd imagined from the handwriting, truly in his 70s, with a white beard gone long, and hands that had the look of hands that had worked hard for decades. She sat down across from him without being invited because she had the sense that Harlan would not mind. You're Jasmine, he said, not a question. You're Harlan, she said. You told me I could take my brave face off sometimes. He looked at her steadily. His eyes were light blue or hazel old and clear. You read it. I read it many times, she said. I wanted to thank you personally. He was quiet for a moment. My Dorothy wore hers for 52 years, he said. Every hard thing that came, and a lot of hard things came, she put the face on. Capable, fine, managing. He looked down at his beer. I always wished I'd told her earlier that she didn't have to, that I wasn't going to think less of her if she let it down. He looked back at Jasmine. I told her eventually, near the end. She said she knew, but it helped to hear it. He paused. So I thought you should hear it while there was time. She reached across the table and put her hand over his briefly. His hand was warm and rough and entirely still. It helped, she said. A lot. He nodded. That was all. But his eyes did the thing eyes do when something lands the way it was meant to. Cole appeared at her shoulder. Bishop wants a word with you, he said. Then quieter. You okay? More than okay, she said. Bishop's word with her was direct, which she'd expected. He pulled her aside at the edge of the room and looked at her with the steady road captain gravity she'd become familiar with. I want you to know something, he said. That Saturday, the vote, it wasn't charity. I said that before, and I'll say it again because I think it matters that you understand the distinction. I understand it, she said. There's more to it than the distinction, he said. That vote unanimous 340 that happens maybe twice in the history of this chapter. Once when a brother's house burned down with his family inside. Once 20 years ago when a cop went crooked and came after 3 of our members for something they didn't do, and the whole club rode to the courthouse. He looked at her. And now once for you. That's the company you're in. She absorbed that, the specific weight of it, the rarity of the number the company had placed her in. Why, she said, not challenging, genuinely asking as she always genuinely asked. Because Cole stood up in chapel and told your story, Bishop said. And when Cole Maddox, who does not ask for things, who does not lean on his brothers, who has been running this chapter for 18 years without once asking for something personal, when he stands up and says this woman matters, there is no discussion. There is only the vote. She looked across the room at Cole, who was talking to 2 older men, and had his arms crossed and his head tilted in the way he listened when he was taking something seriously. He didn't tell me that, she said. No, Bishop said, he wouldn't. He looked at her the way the road captain, who has seen everything, looks at something new. He hasn't stood up for a person in that room in 12 years. Not since Carol. He paused. I thought you should know. She stood very still. Thank you, she said, for telling me. Bishop nodded once and went back to the room, back to the organized sociality of a man who managed 340 people and made it look like simply being present. She stood for a moment at the edge of the room. 12 years. Not since Carol. She looked at Cole again. He'd noticed her standing apart from the group. She'd learned that he noticed everything, and he met her eyes across the room with an expression that was for Cole Maddox entirely unguarded. Not a question, not a calculation, just a man looking at a woman he'd decided to know and letting her see that it was a decision he didn't regret. She crossed the room. Bishop told you something, he said when she reached him. He did. Was it true? Yes, she said. I think it was entirely true. He looked at her, and she thought about $8.63. She thought about 85 cents in the February cold, and 3 miles to walk in a building shaking at 10:34 on a Saturday morning. She thought about a note with 9 words and a card with 340 names and lemon chicken pasta, and Carla's red circles, and Patricia in a brown coat in a parking lot deciding to do one decent thing. She thought about a woman named Carol who was loud and loved her students and wore a brave face and died on a Thursday in March and left a man who needed 6 weeks and 4 brothers and the length of a country to begin to understand that she was gone. She thought about what it meant to carry something right. And I'm glad you stood up, she said. I'm glad you told them. Cole was quiet for a moment. In the middle of 340 people and their families and the noise of a room that had been doing this together for decades, he was entirely still. So am I, he said. She stayed until 10. She said goodbye to Harlan, who told her to come back in the summer when they did the outdoor ride and the food was better. She said goodbye to Ruth, who pressed a container of leftover food into her hands and pretended not to notice when Jasmine hugged her, because Ruth was not a hugger, and Jasmine had learned this and chose to hug her anyway, and Ruth tolerated it with the exasperated affection of a woman who didn't hug, but was not entirely opposed to being hugged. Cole drove her home. He walked her to the door of her building, not upstairs, just to the door, because they were still learning the geography of what they were to each other, and there was no rushing a geography. Next Saturday, he said. I have Carla in the morning, she said. I know. After Carla. Dinner again. You cook or I cook? You said you'd make a pie, he said. She had said that weeks ago. He'd remembered. Apple, she said. My grandmother's recipe. I'll bring wine, he said. She looked at him. This man, this gray-haired, pale-eyed, patient, deliberate man who had stood up in a room of 340 people and said this woman matters, who had driven across the country on a motorcycle to understand that his wife was gone, who had carried something heavy for 12 years and learned to carry it right, who had knocked on her door with a note that said 9 words and then kept every single thing those 9 words implied. Cole, she said. Jasmine. Don't be late, she said. He almost smiled. The almost smile she'd been cataloging since the first phone call, the one that lived in his eyes before it reached his mouth and sometimes never quite made it all the way. I've never been late a day in my life, he said. She laughed. He watched her laugh. And then he walked back to his truck and she went inside and climbed the stairs to her apartment and unlocked the door and stood in her kitchen with the lights on and Ruth's container of food in her hands and let herself feel the full weight of where she was. She was not who she had been 6 weeks ago. That woman, the one with $8.63 and a 3-mile walk in a city that didn't see her. She was still in here somewhere. She hadn't been replaced. She'd been built on. Layer by layer, choice by choice, door by door, each small, decent act compounding into something that had architecture now. Something with a foundation. She was not just surviving. She was not just enduring. She was not just managing the distance between one crisis and the next. She was living imperfectly, incompletely with debts still on the books and a long way still to go, and a learning curve at Carla's that was steep, and a man she was still figuring out, in a city that was still forgotten by everyone who hadn't chosen to stay in it. But she was living it forward. She was living it with her eyes open and her brave face down and people around her who knew the difference between her capable voice and her real one and chose to stay anyway. She put Ruth's food in the refrigerator. She washed her hands. She sat at the kitchen table with the card in front of her and looked at it for a long time, 340 names, 340 different handwritings, 340 men who had made a unanimous decision about what one woman's decency was worth. She didn't cry. She was done crying about this. That wasn't dismissal, it was completion. The thing had moved past the point where tears were the right response and into the territory where the only adequate thing was to carry it forward. She closed the card. She would make the pie on Friday night, so it was ready for Saturday. She'd found her grandmother's recipe in the small box of paper she kept from her childhood index. Cards, her grandmother's handwriting and pencil, the measurements slightly imprecise the way old family recipes always were, because the real measurements lived in the hands of the woman who made it, and the card was just a reminder. She'd make it the right way. She'd get it right. She'd get a lot of things right, not all at once, not without errors and red circles and things she'd have to look at 1,000 times before her eye learned the pattern. But she'd get them right, one decision at a time, one decent act, one door held open for the next thing to walk through. That was how it worked, not in grand gestures or sudden reversals, but in the accumulated weight of small true things, each one placed carefully on top of the last, until you looked up one day and discovered you'd built something real. Jasmine Carter had started with $8. She was just getting started.